Claire O'Connor. How are you today?
I'm well. How are you, Rich?
I'm doing all right. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Let me go ahead and give you a brief introduction for the
Mhm.
audience so they get a feel for who you are. You are the founder and creative director of Wellness Web Designers, which is a full-service collaborative brand and web design agency dedicated to serving holistic wellness business owners and helping them elevate their online presence with ease. You're an intuitive essence midwife with over 30 years of professional experience in the healing arts, personal growth, and holistic wellness spaces. You act as an intuitive and empathic essence midwife, bringing keen sensibilities to each project. You're a multifaceted designer and wordsmith, combining your talents as a brand stylist, creative strategist, web designer, and wordsmith. And you have a background in holistic human development, and your expertise is informed by extensive undergraduate studies in social and environmental psychology, years of experience as an interior design consultant, and you have a BA in holistic human development, which enriches your approach to design and client collaboration. Wow.
I was like, who wrote that? That's pretty good.
That's an amazing approach with design for that community. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, and our pre-conversation was phenomenal too. So I'm anticipating this being just as great. So
Me
to
too.
start off, I only have one question scripted, like I mentioned, and that is, where were you born and what was life like as a kid for Claire?
That's such a great starting question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really grounds and frames everything. Yeah. Yeah, so I was born and raised in New Jersey, exit 9.
All right.
If you're from New Jersey, you always live off of an exit.
Right.
So that was New Brunswick, which is where Rutgers University is.
Okay.
And I grew up in a very suburban, lower middle class environment in a subdivision where all the houses looked like one another. And but interestingly enough, everyone who bought a house in that neighborhood when I was one, when my parents bought that house, they all were young families. So it was actually a little bit of a throwback to like an old fashioned come home when the street lights come on, where you're just playing in the street and it's safe. I think it was probably like the last gasp of that sort of life,
Yeah.
playing with sticks, stickball in the street, and
Right.
and making dams in the gutter when the rainstorms would come through. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so in that regard, it was a very generic setting, but also I'm grateful for it because it is now a dinosaur for the most part. I think there's probably some areas where you still have that, but my sister and brother and their families still live in that area and they didn't have that experience with their kids. So anyway, so that's one thing I'm grateful about my upbringing. And I went to Catholic parochial school from grades 1 through 8, and then I went to a public high school. And the public high school was, again, just like when public education was at its heyday, when teachers really cared and where they were valued and honored and really went the extra mile for the kids. It was a really small high school. I graduated in a class of 75, and the teachers were just next level. And I credit them a lot to being vertical as an
Okay.
adult,
Yeah.
because a lot of people in my family of origin aren't vertical.
Okay.
And as far as the family of origin culture, my dad was 100% Irish, my mother is 100% Polish, and there was Polish drunks on one side and Irish drunks on the other side. So the jovial drunks on the Irish side and the somber drunks on the Polish side,
Okay.
and everyone in my family of origin is either an alcoholic or married to an alcoholic.
Okay.
And huge extended family, like my nuclear family was just me and two siblings. I was the oldest.
All right.
And but lots and lots of cousins because
Yeah.
yeah. Polish and Irish don't believe in birth control. If you're a Polish Catholic and an Irish Catholic, you don't believe in birth control. So
Right, right.
lots of cousins and lots of aunts and uncles, and they're all either alcoholics or married to alcoholics.
Okay.
And my dad worked second shift my whole entire childhood. So he was either asleep and we have to tiptoe around the house and be quiet, or he was drunk and we have to then watch his mood, whether he's in a good mood or whether he's had enough beers that he's now become a mean drunk. And so that was literally from 0 to going away to college at 18.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so I was, being the oldest and a very nurturing constitution out of the gate, I stepped into the adulting role in that family because my mother's reaction formation to my dad, her father was an alcoholic too, so it was familiar for her. And my mother had her own set of pathologies, which when I was a child, I didn't necessarily think of her as the problem parent. I
Okay.
thought of my dad as the problem parent. But when I went away to college and started studying psychology and family systems and the idea, the radical idea that addiction is actually an illness and
Mhm.
not a moral failing.
Yeah.
That idea was first presented to me as a freshman in college, and I just immediately forgave my father for pretty much everything.
Nice.
And then I realized, oh, my mother is actually the problem parent. She's extremely narcissistic personality
O-
and hypercritical. I actually described her as so critical that everyone who meets her, it's like being in a wind tunnel. Like your hair blows back because you're just like, wow, that woman is a force of nature
Yeah.
of finding fault.
Yeah.
And so growing up, like being she was also chronically ill throughout her whole life, undiagnosed,
Okay.
and basically thrown into a single parent role. And my brother was the diagnosed problem in the family with his, what I would consider now at this point, garden variety juvenile delinquency, getting in trouble with the cops and
Yeah.
stealing things and being truant from school
Yeah.
and just drinking at a young age and very oppositional defiant disorder, some would say.
Sure.
And I was straight A's and the teachers loved me, and because school was my sanctuary.
Yeah.
And then my sister, who was like the accidental third, there was a big age gap between my brother and her,
Okay.
and the intention was to only have two kids, and so she was accidental, and my mother really never let her forget it.
Oh
And
man.
yeah, and also one of my mother's favorite things, this is when you think about like your family, your parents' actual story, like their story as a human being, when you're old enough to think of them as people instead of parents. Learning about my mother, that when that era, when she married my father in 64 or 65, it was really the point, and I'm sure so many people can relate to this, where you had three or four choices as a woman in that era. You could be a nurse, a teacher, a stewardess, or a stay at home mom.
Yeah.
And she wanted to be a stewardess. She wanted to travel the world. And she tried over and over again to meet the weight limit, because that was when they used to put weight limits on stewardesses. You had to be really slim.
Yeah.
And she's a round-bodied Polish woman. It's not going to happen. So
Right.
she never could make the weight cut. And it was a devastating thing for her. And all of her friends, she was like she married my dad when she was like 27, which in that era was considered, you're almost a spinster.
Yeah.
And all of her friends were already married and starting to have kids. And so I think she just got to the point where, oh, I can't be a stewardess, so I might as well get married.
Ah,
Because that was the only other option in her mind.
sure.
And my dad came along, and I always wonder like what he saw in her, like how was she as a human being when she was in her mid 20s, late 20s,
Yeah.
that we don't see now or didn't see as children and as adult to adult.
Yeah.
Because I really do think that he fell in love with her at first and he pursued her, and she was just like, he's tall, so I'll marry him.
Oh, okay.
He's tall and he has a job.
Yeah.
She actually told me that when I asked her fairly recently, why did you marry dad? What did you see in him? He was tall and he had a job.
Wow. So it was a survival thing.
Yeah, yeah, and and to a certain extent pragmatic, but also very I think like a very built-in defeatism.
Yeah.
And I guess they must have gotten pregnant pretty soon after they were married with me,
Okay.
and they were living with my mother's mother, who was also a force of nature and very militant in a lot of ways and very like not a nurturing cell in her body. And my grandfather, who was the drunk in that family, was actually a sweet little old Polish man. He was always sneaking candy to us.
Okay.
And but couldn't hold down a job, would steal from his wife to buy beer,
Oh,
and
wow.
like actually stole her wedding ring from her to
Wow.
sell it to buy beer. And she was working, supporting 5 children, working in a sweatshop, like a literal sweatshop, making
Yeah.
dresses with all the other Polish ladies down the street.
Were they, I don't mean to interrupt, but
No,
I just
go
want to
ahead.
ask it. Were they, your grandparents, were they first generation or were they already established here in terms of the family line?
My Both my grandparents were born in Poland,
Okay.
but they came over as small children.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so my great grandmother actually lived across the street from them.
Got it.
She died when I was fairly young. I didn't really know her. I'm guessing she probably died before I was 6. But yeah, she was also quite. I think that my story about that generation and that cultural milieu,
Hmm.
Eastern European culture, I think is a very, I hope I won't offend anybody by saying this, but there's a heaviness to it.
Yes.
I think that being that close to the Iron Curtain during that era, I think life was very hard, and it's also like a very harsh climate. They lived in northern Poland where the winters were really long and heat was hard to afford and food was hard to afford,
Yeah.
and so I think you're just very much in a survival mode, and you're just dealing with like kind of that first rung of Maslow's hierarchy. You're not really thinking about what are my dreams for myself. You're just thinking, how can I stay warm and how can I get something in my stomach?
Sure.
And so the intergenerational trauma, the epigenetics of that carrying forward,
Yes.
when you think about it is said that our mothers were a cell inside their mother, was a cell inside their mother. So there's actually like a direct physical connection as well as just the spiritual cultural imprint that carries forward in the parenting styles and stories that are told about how life is, and life is hard and life is a vale of tears. And also the Catholic religion, at least how I was raised in it, it was very Polish Catholic Orthodox. It was a Polish church. When I was a kid, the masses were still said in Polish, and it had that heaviness to it where it's like God is to be feared. Everything is being watched.
Yeah.
You were born with original sin, and so you're already bad to begin with. And if you're a woman, you're double bad because of Eve.
Yeah.
And so coming into that set of stories is just like intense.
Yeah.
And at the same time, like now as an adult, nearing 60, I can recognize my privilege and go, yeah, all right, it's really easy to look back at those people and say that they didn't try hard enough, or they were too negative, or they were too mean to one another, or there was not enough love to go around, or people should have nurtured each other better so that they wouldn't continue to be addicts, and like all the stories I told myself when I was younger about
Sure.
how I was superior to all of that. And it's no, Claire, you have a tremendous amount of privilege being born in the era that you were born in, and to have the freedom to make different choices and write new stories about how you are going to experience reality. Yeah.
And with that, in elementary school, going to the Catholic school, you mentioned that it was a place of kind of retreat for you, a potential place of safety, so to speak, because you're outside of the house. and outside of experiencing what your parents and brought to that environment. Were you, being the oldest, were you outgoing at that point in time, or were you just trying to fit into the class? What was the personality type at that age?
Yeah, I really didn't experience the support of school as a haven until high school. In grade school, it was the opposite of that.
Okay, that's where I wanted to go.
I
Yeah.
was extremely withdrawn, extremely shy, never spoke. I was like afraid of my own shadow. I was extremely afraid of the nuns who were teachers. They were militant. There was corporal punishment. There was public shaming. There was berating and name calling and just a really toxic environment,
Domineering.
very domineering. And then the school was on the same like plot of land as the Polish church where I grew up. So it was like daily mass. You
Right.
come to school at 8 in the morning and you go to mass.
Okay.
And the priests are, they were some asshole priests, let me tell you. Like booming voices and the fire and brimstone, even though Catholicism I don't generally think of as fire and brimstone,
Yeah.
they definitely had that flavor where it
Okay.
was like you are just waiting for the other shoe to drop at every moment. You're
Right.
waiting for God to rebuke you. You're waiting for the devil to steal you away and never return you. And then, of course, at home, you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop around my dad and also my mother's control and criticism and anger because she was just so angry at my father for
Yeah.
abandoning her because he was either asleep or drunk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there any, at that point in time, was there any creativity that was coming out that was allowing you to have a little bit of a retreat into a different world? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, 100%. In grade school, my I had two refuges. One was drawing, and the other was going to the library and hanging out in the library and bringing home armloads of books and then
Mm,
retreating to my bedroom to just read.
okay.
And I was actually thinking about this the other night. What was the big lifesaver for me?
Yeah.
Like when I think about being an adult now, and I will say to my husband, it's actually a miracle that I'm vertical, and metaphorically and non-metaphorically,
Yeah.
to think about the religious abuse, the emotional abuse, the verbal abuse, the physical abuse was that my child self was subjected to
Yeah.
for years, especially during that formative window
Right.
when your nervous system is particularly vulnerable. It's a miracle that I'm high functioning as I am. I'm certainly not as high functioning as some, but compared to everyone that I'm blood related to,
Yeah.
it's a pretty dramatic difference. And so I do attribute drawing, and I would draw animals. Like it was just I would just draw animals.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just had notebook after notebook of these. I still have one of the notebooks. I don't know what happened to the rest of them. Maybe they're still in my mother's attic, but very rudimentary little drawings, but they were pretty good for my age.
Sure.
They were all smiley little animals.
They had the joy that you were trying to find.
Yeah, yeah, lots of horses, lots of dogs. I actually had a particular love for birds and for little rodents like
Okay.
mice and
Yeah.
field mice and
Nice. Were any of your friends at that time creative as well, or were you able to garner some friends that had some commonalities you could relate to?
not in grade school. In grade school, I think I was probably, so the Catholic school was 1 through 8. So there
Yeah.
wasn't like a separate middle school. It was all in the same building, same set of teachers, same routines, same cafeteria, all of that. It probably really wasn't until maybe 8th grade that I even had a friend.
Okay.
Yeah, I just didn't, my home was not a welcoming place. It wasn't like I could invite friends over.
Gotcha.
And I think there was a lot of shame around if I get known, they're going to find out
Yeah.
the feeling.
Sure. Yeah.
Even though, in order to have that thought, I must have also known that other families didn't live this way. And I think I must have gotten that from all of the reading that I did. I love the Little House on the Prairie series and
Okay.
Nancy Drew and
Yeah.
the Hardy Boys and
Yeah.
and also lots of stories about animals and stories about all creatures great and small and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay. Then let's move over into what would traditionally be considered middle school. That's that seventh and eighth grade period of time, and starting to find some friends potentially. How was that for you?
Yeah, my I don't remember how this happened, but I did develop a friendship with another Polish girl. Most of the kids in the school were Polish,
Okay.
but not very, there were only maybe a third of them that came from first generation, like their parents. There were only a few of them where they were still speaking Polish in the home. But so those were the ones that I gravitated to because we had the commonality. And so I remember one girl, Margaret, and another girl, her name was Barbara, but her Polish name was Basia. And we both had some similar stories around how our parents were. And so we bonded over, oh, your parents are assholes too. The individuation process is starting, and you're like, yeah, these people are crazy.
Yeah.
Because I think up until then, I don't know when this occurs, but, and I don't know if it's referred to as the age of reason.
Okay.
Like you reach a certain age where you realize this isn't adding up.
Yes.
Like, why is it? I think the first thing, and maybe I don't know how old I was, maybe in fourth grade or something. And of course, one of the stories is if a baby dies before they're baptized, they don't go to heaven, they go to limbo.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
The baby didn't do anything wrong. Why is the baby now beholden to this jail sentence that they didn't earn or deserve? Like, and so I was asking, like, why? Can you explain this to me?
Yeah.
And it was like, so then like things started adding up after that,
Okay.
where you'd get another, this doesn't make sense. If this is true, then this can't be true. Or if this is true, then this also should be true. And the whole thing started unraveling because when I was younger, I was very devout. I was a very devout little girl.
Okay.
Like I wanted to be a nun when I grew up. I wanted to be a cloistered nun.
Wow. Okay.
And I don't know, do you know what a cloistered nun is?
I don't know the word cloister, but obviously the nuns
They're no,
were.
they're nuns that retreat from the world, and they are literally like behind a wall.
Oh,
And
wow.
they have the my aunt, my mother's older sister was a surrogate mother figure to us in my childhood.
Okay.
Also batshit crazy, but she was off the charts devout Catholic. And so she, being a surrogate mother, took me under her wing. I'm going to mold you into this nun because I can't be a nun because I'm married, but you can be a nun. So we're going to make sure of that. And so she would take me to this convent in Washington, New Jersey, Carmelite nun or a Carmelite order, and they were cloistered, which meant that no contact with the outside world whatsoever. So we would make these little scapulas,
Okay.
which are like necklaces that have scratchy wool on the back and front.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to put the scratchy wool against your skin because you're causing yourself to suffer. And that suffering then gives you, I guess, either bonus points to get out of purgatory faster yourself, or if you don't need those points, then those can be willed to other souls who are trapped in purgatory. So it's like a self flagellation light.
Yes.
So my aunt was tasked with sewing these little scapulas, and I was tasked with helping her like package them. She would make hundreds of them, and she had this assembly line set up in her back room, which was also her closet, this tiny little room with the sewing machine in the corner. And it was
Okay.
like this assembly line. She also worked in a sweatshop, but that she worked in the handkerchief sweatshop.
Gotcha.
Who would have thunk, right? Yeah, handkerchief sweatshop, and her job was she had a little scissor, and as there was a machine that sewed the edges on the handkerchiefs, and it's a continuous thing. It goes through the machine, and so she would be in charge of cutting. So literally for 10 hours a day, she would cut a string. So she had good
Production skills.
assembly line. She had good assembly line skills. So I was her little protege, and I would help her make these scapulas. And then every few months, she'd have a big box of them all ready to go. And we'd drive up to Washington, New Jersey to the cloistered nuns. And there was this giant Lazy Susan that was closed with a slice open on one side.
Yeah.
So the Lazy Susan would turn around and you'd put the box of scapulas in there, and then it would turn around and the nuns would get it. And I don't know what they would do with it at that point. I guess distribute them somehow, or somebody would distribute them to the churches. But yeah, so that was what I wanted. I wanted to be one of those nuns and just live behind the wall.
That's very interesting. It's very interesting from the perspective of the home life is a bit stormy in terms of a weather comparison.
Yeah.
And you were very quiet and withdrawn as a younger child. And then as you're getting older, you're starting to realize that, wait a second, these things aren't making sense to me. Some of these doctrine examples that are being told to me that I need to agree with and implement into my life don't completely make sense. And I can relate to that as well because I went to public school up until fourth grade. And then from
Mm,
there, my parents put me into a fundamental Baptist Christian school.
wow.
And so when I started hearing that type of information coming from them of how you should live and what you're supposed to do and all that kind of stuff, I was always questioning. I'm like, that doesn't sound quite right. It
Yeah.
doesn't feel like it's full truth. So I can relate to that. But where I was going was the fact that as you're experiencing this, you're looking potentially at a future where you can just be closed off from the world and
Right.
don't have to deal with it at
Right.
all. You
Right.
just
Yeah.
in that safe space, so to speak,
And
where,
protected by God's grace from all
yeah,
bad things.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's very interesting. With thinking that's going to be the case, and now you've got this friend who you've got some commonalities with, is there potentially a shift in that decision, or are you still thinking, all right, that's going to be the thing that I'm going to continue on with? And did you have any other friends that you were getting close to at that point, or was it just the one girl?
It was mostly Basha, but I was also, when I think back, it's fuzzy, but there were definitely, like, I can remember 10 interiors of homes. So I know that I was interacting with and I think maybe it was like through Girl Scouts.
Okay.
The Girl Scout troop that I was in, it was largely kids from St. Mary's, but there were also some kids from the public school. So then you start figuring out, because I don't know if this is true of all Catholic subcultures, because the Polish Catholic subculture has like I said, a particular flavor to it. But there was this feeling that we have the right belief and everyone else has the wrong belief.
Yeah.
And so at a certain point, I was like, how can all of these other people be wrong?
Yeah.
Even to the point where in the town where I grew up, which isn't a very big town, it was 15, still even only under 15,000, there were two Catholic churches, and they were both Polish Catholic churches. Because I don't know if that's more of an East Coast thing or the New York, New Jersey little very ethnic pockets.
Yeah.
Here's the Italian neighborhood, here's the Portuguese neighborhood, here's the Polish neighborhood, and the Jews are over there on the other side. And we don't like the Jews because they're rich and money is bad.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And they drive nice cars and they cheat people to get the money. That was the story my father told me about the Jews. And
Right.
he was very bigoted, extraordinarily bigoted, and actually became even more and more bigoted as he aged,
Yeah.
to the point where he was just a rageaholic watching Fox News and Rush Limbaugh 12
Oh,
hours a
wow.
day. But the other church was our church was very ornate, like gold leaf and just all the frescoes and absurdly rococo.
Yeah. Okay.
Just like baroque, I don't know, baroque,
Rogue.
rococo. It was
Yeah.
just dripping in decor
Yeah.
to the
Ornate.
point where you didn't even know where to look. Like it was almost obscene. And then the other Catholic church in town was very mid-century modern, and
Okay.
everything was very clean and serene, and there was like no extraneous decor. And it was on the other side of town, and my cousins on my Polish side went to that church, and I remember sleeping over one time and then going to church with them and going, feeling like I was going to have a hammer come down on me because I was in the wrong church.
Ah,
So just to like paint how it was very us and them,
yeah.
and we
Yeah.
have the right way, and this is the only way to think, and everyone else is wrong,
Sure.
which is pretty stunning to say when you think about what a small slice. Yeah, there's a gazillion Catholics in the world, but how many Polish Catholics and how many Polish American Catholics and how many Polish American Catholics who are this Byzantine kind of like almost a Russian Orthodox kind of style, you know?
Yeah.
So, like, how much narrower can we get? And we are still the chosen ones.
Mm, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Did the did all of that ornate artwork, sculptures and painting and different things like that, did that intrigue you or entice you in any way to give any kind of inspiration, or were you drawn to it in any way?
I think I was. When I think about like in high school, I was in studio art and I was in the talented and gifted like subset of that group.
Okay.
And for my junior and senior year, I was actually like shipped out with one other student. So there were the two of us that were in the tag program in art that we were like shipped out and like the chosen ones to go to this local college to do like a really in-depth painting and
Okay.
believe it or not, like abstract expressionist focus
Yeah.
and studying the abstract expressionists and we got pulled out of school to go to that program. It was I think it was like one full day a week for 2 years.
Okay.
Me and Steve Lepore.
All right.
And so to answer your question, when I think about the kind of things that I was painting and drawing and creating in high school during that era, they definitely had that feeling of otherworldliness, like very. At that point, I also was getting some influence from. God bless this man, this English high school English teacher, Ed Heck, Mr. Heck. He looked just like Benny Hill. I don't know if you remember Benny Hill. He was
Yeah.
like he was Benny Hill's doppelganger. But let me tell you, that man, he had us reading. First of all, he had us reading Siddhartha, which is probably one of the most fork in the road kind of books for me. He had
Okay.
us reading all the Transcendentalists, Thoreau,
Oh wow.
John Muir. He had us reading Joseph Campbell.
Okay.
So all of that kind of mushed into a lot of the Catholic iconography. And when I remember the last time I went home, which was many years ago, there was this one giant painting down in the basement of this. It really looked like the Mother Mary, but through Joseph Campbell's eyes.
Okay.
But then also like the Greek goddess. That was the other thing too. I also studied Greek mythology in high school, and that was another like, oh my gosh, this is a different world.
Right.
And so I saw all of the influences in this giant painting of this woman. It was like Aphrodite and Mother Mary and like the archetype of the mother lover, semi sexualized sort of imagery, but also chaste at the same time. And I was
Right.
like, I should bring this painting home and just, or at least I should have at least taken a picture of it. But it
Right.
was like the days before smartphones and I didn't do that. But yeah, to answer your question, I think a lot of that did come through. When I was in grade school, most of the imagery was very like fantastical imagery, like anthropomorphized animals and hobbits and little hobbit houses too. I was very obsessed with little hobbit houses.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting.
the under the earth with the
Yep.
little rounded doors and the
Yeah.
little smoke coming up out of the chimney.
For sure. For sure.
It's still my fantasy house.
That's cool. That's very interesting. And there's an element that, that whole genre of lore
Hmm.
is connected to the earth in a
Hmm.
very strong way, which doesn't necessarily correlate to the religious doctrines, things of that nature. So I see it as another part of you that is starting to experience still that more questioning and
Hmm.
potential understanding of this isn't all that there is
Right.
in this
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too that it's like there's an escapist sort of world there as well when you think about the kinds of imagery that we were exposed to as children from Disney, like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and how they lived in these little houses in the woods, and all the animals were their friends, and there was really nothing bad happening. It was a peaceful, idyllic, and so I think there was a lot of me feeling like that's a world I want to live in.
yeah, yeah, exactly. With being able to go off to these advanced program class with, what was his name, Peter? That
Steve
Stephen,
Laporte,
Stephen,
yeah. And
Stephen.
it was like college level class.
Yeah,
It was like being on campus with the older kids and,
right.
being taught by a college professor.
Yeah. At that point, is there becoming any interest in boys in comparison to your thought process of I'm going to be a nun and just be completely secluded from the world? Is there any of that interest taking place at that point in time as you're starting to experience these other options?
Yeah. I had only, I think, one or two boyfriends in what would be the equivalent of middle school.
Yeah,
Eddie Kliskowski and Paul Morosco, both little Polish boys. But it was all like innocent stuff because I was very much no drugs, no alcohol, no bad behavior. I'm saving my virginity until marriage. Very committed to that idea. Purity culture was huge
sure. Yeah,
in that subculture. And I was like, yeah, I'm definitely waiting until I'm married. I'm not doing this. But I did have a huge crush on Eddie Kliskowski. Even thinking about him now, and he looked I can't remember the name of the actor. The Hardy Boys. There was a TV show with the Hardy Boys, and there were these two like blonde surfer dudes that
yeah.
played them. Sean something, and anyway, so he
Okay.
looked Sean Cassidy, and then the other dude, and so Eddie Kliskowski looked just like the other dude, and
Yeah.
he was funny, and his parents were nice and normal,
Okay.
and yeah, but I think we only just smooched. But then making the decision. Oh, so my crazy aunt, who was the religious zealot who was like shepherding me into nunnery,
Yeah. Yes.
for my eighth grade graduation gift, she bought me a plane ticket to Portugal
Oh, wow.
to go with this group of other eighth graders to this place where these two children had seen a vision of Mary.
Okay.
Fatima. I don't know if you're familiar with Fatima.
Yes.
So it was
Yeah.
Our Lady of Fatima. So
Yeah.
we got to go there with a plane load of eighth graders, all
Okay.
women, all young girls.
Okay.
And it was chaperoned by a priest,
Huh.
Father Fox.
Oh,
Fox in the hen house,
how
right?
appropriate. Yes.
Yeah. And so that was a 1 week trip. I'd never been on an airplane before. I'd never been out of the country. I'd never been really even out of New Jersey. I think we might have gone to Virginia Beach on vacation one time, which was an epic disaster. But yeah,
No.
so we didn't do vacations. We never had money for that. And didn't have just the functionality
Sure.
to put everyone in, just like that's a higher order of function than we have to put five people in a car and drive across state lines to go and have a vacation. But so it was like this big thing. And Basha, her grandfather agreed to pay for her ticket. So the two of us went.
Oh, cool.
And did you see those balloons?
Yeah.
Some gesture I must have done to make that happen.
That was wild.
Anyways, so there's a basilica there they've built. It's a pilgrimage site. It's very well developed, very touristy. And we stayed in this nearby hotel, and we would go spend pretty much the whole day at the basilica, and it had this big giant giant courtyard where there'd be pilgrims from all over Europe that had come, and the thing to do was to walk on your knees around the perimeter of this giant courtyard, which was probably twice as big, maybe even three times as big as a football field.
Uh-huh.
So you would be on your knees,
Okay.
like just going around. And so people, there, it was just like blood
Yeah.
on the, it was cobblestone. So that was what, and I remember after getting back from, so there was still this idea that I'm in this world of Catholicism and I will stay in this world of Catholicism and I will deepen my commitment to Catholicism and all of that. And actually, the opposite ended up happening because now I'm 13 and
Right.
I'm on the cusp of, am I going to St. Joe's or am I going to South River High?
Okay.
And to be able to say, to basically outmaneuver the adults
Yeah.
so that I could go to the public high school instead of St. Joe's, which was a busing situation. You had to bus like 4 towns over.
Okay.
And I was like, Eddie Kluskowski went there, but I just fought tooth and nail. I'm going to the public high school. And
Yeah.
it was like, you would have thought that I was asking to get tattoos all over my body or something, or get a nose ring, or all of the above.
Yeah.
But somehow I won, and I don't remember how. And maybe it was because it was going to be free. So maybe
Right.
my parents were like, yeah, we're glad to
Yeah.
stop paying tuition
For
because
sure.
it's bankrupting us. But that was really the fork in the road, too, because going to that high school and being in that milieu where you have just a huge mix of ethnicities, not everyone's Polish, not everyone's white, not everyone is from the Polish neighborhood. Not everyone believes the same thing that you do. There's Methodists and there's Lutherans and there's Baptists and
Yeah.
there's no Jews because there's no Jews in South River. But I say that with my father's voice.
Okay. Yeah.
Not that I still believe any of that, but
Right.
there was that tone of this is a better school because there's no Jews there that
Mm.
are going to be stealing thunder and weaseling their way to the top and all the kind of stories that my dad told me about Jews.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
so
the,
that really opened it up. I definitely started having more friends and started feeling I became friends with this Italian woman, Nadia, and then another woman, Katie. So we were like a foursome, Basha, Nadia, and Katie and I,
okay.
foursome throughout college, throughout high school. And I don't remember what religion Katie was, but she was like a firebrand. She was like, did not suffer fools. And so it was really refreshing because I was always like quiet, towing the line,
Yeah.
having lots of thoughts inside, but really never expressing them, and getting to be around Katie, who was just take no prisoners, and she was smart as a whip and just funny and just so sure of herself. And so I was able to adopt a lot of, like, just by osmosis, her way of being in the world. And then just feeling, I mean, in my high school yearbook at the back where they have like an index where
Yeah.
it's here's all the clubs you've belonged to, my paragraph was like this, and it was like a 5-point type,
Yeah.
this big, because I literally joined every club so that I wouldn't have to go home.
Okay.
An introvert
Yeah. Yeah.
joining every club, an HSP, highly sensitive person,
Yeah.
introvert,
Yeah.
signed me up for every club. And so as a result, like the teachers were like, what is going on here? Like, why don't you want to go home? And I don't know. I think I had a really good counselor, Mr. Grush, Howard Grush. Funny that I remember these names, but I imagine they might have conclaved a bit and be like, oh, watch out for this one. Or
Right.
so I was scooped in by these teachers. There were probably easily 10 teachers that just went out of their way to make me feel like I mattered,
Nice. That's
and
amazing.
that I was smart, and that I had good ideas, and that, like, just pulling me out of my shell.
Yeah.
God bless on them, even though I don't really technically believe in God.
Yeah, no, I find that interesting across quite a few stories that I've been privy to as of late on this new journey of this podcast, of where there's mentors outside of the home that are really noticing something about the individual, and they
Hmm.
want to help nurture that because they
Hmm.
see potential, and they want to create the opportunity for them to be able to go farther
Hmm.
than potentially what they're experiencing at home or what their parents are saying that they need to be doing, that kind of stuff. So it's very fascinating. The point in, were you going to the extracurricular college scenario? Was that ninth, 10th grade, or was that into 11th, 12th?
It was just 11th and 12th. I was in studio art for all 4 years,
Okay.
but the tag program was junior and
Just
senior year, and it was one full school day a week that Steve and I went. And because I remember he had his driver's license.
okay.
So he had just gotten his driver's license. So we were like 16 and we were able to drive 5 towns over to go to,
Very cool.
to the college.
Kind of like a mini adventure every week.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's very cool. That's very cool.
Yeah. And he was not Catholic either.
Okay.
And he was a very gregarious, super smart, funny, I think his family was very loving and very like high functioning. And these long drives to and from the college, I'd get even like another perspective on how other people lived.
Right. And obviously, there's conversations are going on about different things in life and all that kind of stuff. So I'm sure that's playing in, right? With that experience and how are you doing grade wise?
I always had an easy time with
Okay.
school, great with studies, because
I
I
love,
was always able to see the logic of what the teacher wanted. And so it wasn't so much that I was smart, it's just I was a really good test taker because I understood what the test was doing.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Another characteristic of perception outside of a normalized structure, as it's how I'm recognizing that. So, are you thinking about changing your life course and not going into
Oh,
the
yeah.
nunnery at this
Very
point?
quickly, very quickly.
And are you thinking I'm going to go off to college and study art, or what was your
Hmm.
thoughts at that?
Yeah, I really wanted to study art and was encouraged to do that by a lot of the adults at the high school.
Yeah.
My counselor, my art teacher, there were these two other teachers that were like, I don't know what they would call them today, but they were like the teachers that worked with the special kids, meaning special, they didn't do well
Yeah.
in class and they needed to be pulled out of the classroom to be dealt with, which was my brother.
Okay.
And there was this one teacher, Mr. Russell, giant black man, very just the embodiment of love and compassion.
Oh, wow.
Tall and just broad and just had a swagger. And I was just like, first of all, Catholic school, there's where I went, you didn't even see a black person.
Right.
Going to school and then having like a third of the school be black and a bunch of the teachers be black. And I just was like, and my dad was very bigoted. And I was very much, they're humans too.
Right.
There's nothing different other than the color of their skin.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? I don't even understand. Like I never saw any of the logic. And I was very, to my mother's credit, there was I don't know what they called it, but it was like they would take an underprivileged kid, some program would take underprivileged kids from the inner city and give them a period of time in a suburban home, in a suburban school, instead of where there was just like a lot of urban blight.
Okay.
And it was, I'm sure it was through the Catholic Charities or something like that. So my mother actually did this. When we were in grade school, we had this young black boy come and live with us for a period of time.
Oh, wow.
And he was like such a lovely human being. He was, I think, 2 or 3 years younger than me, but he was just like so sweet and so funny and curious,
Uh-huh.
but also like scared shitless.
Sure.
But I just had such an upwelling of warmth and care and love for him, like immediately. Even I think I was maybe like in sixth grade or something.
Okay.
And so I was like, what is my dad talking about? So God bless my mother for being able to override what I'm sure were my father's objections to that.
Right.
Like all the stereotypes that he would be reinforcing inside his own head about toxic bullshit about I can't even speak it because it's so evil. And I just was like, what the hell is he talking about? This kid is great.
Yeah.
And so it was almost like it became a mission to prove my dad wrong. So in high school, I did date a lot. I had a series of boyfriends. Kept my virginity though, which
Yeah.
was no small task. in that
In
in
high
that
school, that's,
in
yeah,
high school and
hormones and all that stuff are
yeah,
raging.
yeah, and also like public school and kids doing drinking and doing drugs and partying and going down to the pits, which was this place in town where there were no adults that you could go and hide out, and there was no roads, so the cops couldn't find you and all that. I didn't go there, and
Right.
but yeah, I had over the course of high school, I probably had 3 or 4 boyfriends, but I just, and I think too, that's like when I think about the trajectory of my relationship life, there was a lot of looking for validation from a male
Gotcha.
because of the unfathered wound.
Right.
Yeah, and so that carried on into my late 20s and probably even into my early 30s, where
Okay.
it was just like not healthy, just codependent. My identity only exists in the context of what this man, how this man or this boy sees me or values me, or very common, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So where did you go to college and what was the major once you'd left high school?
Where did I go to college? Is that what you
Yeah.
said?
Yeah.
Yeah. I went to college in northern Wisconsin, like a mile from Lake Superior,
Okay.
to a small school called Northland College, Northland.
Yeah.
Again, 500 students. I graduated with 75. And when I was junior, senior in high school, of course, your grades are good, so you should go to college. I don't want to go to college. College, I was the first person, I really still am like the first person to have gotten a college degree in my entire extended family. I think I had 2 cousins that were distant cousins that did go to college, but everyone else, it's like you get out of high school and you just
Go
get
to
some
work.
blue collar kind of minimum wage security guard, truck driver, that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. It was like, again, it's what's the landscape of possibility look like? Here are the models that I have.
Correct. Correct.
Here's the invitation to do something different. And because at that point, and this is everyone's story, is like the individuation process and the reaction formation. The lawyer's kids who become a hippie, the hippie's kids who become a stockbroker. So it's like, what can I do that's so far different from this? So
Right.
what can okay, suburban New Jersey, never been camping, never been, have a fascination with nature, obviously, and the natural world, but no actual experience with it other than going down the shore, the
Yeah.
Jersey Shore, which doesn't count as nature for the most part. I was like, I'm gonna major in outdoor education.
Okay.
But it was actually prior to that, my parents actively believe that college is bullshit.
Oh,
College is just utter bullshit. Nobody needs a college education. All they're doing is brainwashing you. It's money that's a waste of money. You can get a job without a college education. Why would you do that? Why would you put off adulthood and be at the teat of a teacher or when you could be earning money. It was very much clear messaging. We don't go to college. And I was like, all right, I either go to art school or I don't go at all. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure, as we all know, starving artist, you can't make money as an artist. So I was like, I'm not going to do that
Okay.
because growing up lower middle class, like I didn't want to be in this place where I was just constantly worried about money. So
Right.
I thought, well,
Yeah.
artists constantly worry about money, right? Quote,
Yes.
air quotes.
Yes.
And oddly enough, even my mother was like, "You're so talented, you've got to go to art school." And I'm like,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, very weird, very not on brand for Loretta, let me tell you.
I'm
But they
serious.
also made it clear that if I insisted on going to school, I they would pay a little bit towards it as long as I chose an in-state school.
Okay.
And I was like, I'm not doing that. I need to get out of New Jersey. I need to get out of this culture.
Yeah.
Aside from the microculture of my family of origin and my extended family, there's also pretty much everyone I graduated high school with also stayed local.
Yeah.
Like it was unusual. I think there were maybe 3 of us out of 75 that went to an out of state school, but I was like, I am out of here. As soon as I turned 18, I was like, because at that point, throughout high school, I guess under the influence of Katie and this other friend Laura, who was 2 years older, who was really a firebrand. I had two firebrand girlfriends. I started becoming very combative with my mother
Okay.
and pushing back instead of just going, how can I help? And how can I help? How can I make it feel better? What can I do to help?
Yeah.
Which was my whole childhood. It was like placating her and soothing her and talking her down off the cliff. She had a lot of like breakdowns, like mental breakdowns, and where she would just run away from home and we would be like left alone.
Oh, wow.
And just the volatility and how hypercritical she was. It was just like I spent my whole 4 years of high school just yelling at her and her yelling at me
Mm.
and her telling the whole refrain throughout my whole childhood for all three of us was you going back to the stewardess thing. You kids are nothing but a burden and I wish I never had you. You kids are nothing but a burden and I wish you never had. You kids make my life miserable. If
Mm.
only I hadn't had kids, I could have had a life. So that was the messaging on a daily, like multiple times a day, and very charged.
Yeah.
Not just like, here's information, but like weaponizing it.
Yeah.
And I was always like, then why the fuck did you have kids? Because you're not didn't doing me any favors. And so there were often times in high school, well, more so I think in grade school, where it was like, I just want to go and be with Jesus. I don't want to be here because my mother doesn't want me.
Okay.
My father doesn't give a shit. He doesn't even notice that I exist except when he's yelling at me or beating me with a belt, which I don't even know what I could have possibly done. I was a good kid,
Yeah.
very acquiescent, very much the peacemaker, very much the how can I smooth things over? How can I create calm in this situation for the adults? Very much like being the adult in the house, like I said earlier.
Yeah.
But so I just wanted to get the fuck out of there and I wanted to go far away. And so that was part of it. And this small school, for some reason, smartly sent their recruiters to New Jersey because New Jersey is 45 minutes wide and 3 minutes long, 3 hours long. 3 hours by 45 minutes, 9 million people.
Yeah.
And most of those people are clustered in the central and northern part and then around Philly. And then the rest of it is like very rural and barren, pine
Okay.
barrens. And so they could send a recruiter, buy a plane ticket to New Jersey, buy one hotel, and they could go to 300 high schools on one trip. So there were so many kids from New Jersey in this little school in rural Wisconsin. And they also had a lot of money to give, grant money to give. So between the merit scholarships and the grants and the financial aid, I moved in with my grandmother, my wire cage grandmother, just so I could use that address and her income on my FAFSA.
Okay.
instead of my parents. And so I was able to get more financial aid.
Gotcha.
And so I went to this really expensive private school, liberal arts environmental college. Every class you took, whether it was math or accounting or biology, like everything had an environmental focus. So I was like, sign me up. And
Okay.
because of Mr. Heck and all the English lit classes I took from him in high school, I was like, I want to be Thoreau. So now I don't want to be a cloistered nun, but I want to be a cloistered living in the woods, living with the animals.
The Hobbit.
Yeah, like a hobbit with no humans around. And I want to write about it, and that's how I'm going to make a living. So that was my declared major, was outdoor writing,
Okay.
and it was under the outdoor education department. So you had to do the outdoor ed curriculum, which was a lot of like basic wilderness skills, winter camping, group process and communication, and wilderness emergency first aid, and all these things that were like also satisfied the itch of the reaction formation of the pendulum swinging. And so, yeah, spending a lot of time outdoors, spending a lot of time in the Northwoods wilderness, spending a lot of time. I did an entire term in basic wilderness skills where we lived like in this, we used our home base was Asheville, North Carolina, and but that was just where we went to take showers and get food. But mostly we were just like doing like whitewater canoeing and rock climbing and backpacking in the Pisgah National Forest and the Smokies
Yeah.
and yeah, so it's like totally loving it, totally loving it, totally loving it.
Yeah, that's beautiful country too. And my family's all both parents side of the family, all from
Hmm.
East Tennessee. So Asheville is very familiar to us.
Yeah, gorgeous. I fell in love with that whole area. I was like, I'm gonna live here someday.
Yeah. Yeah. They just experienced some horrendous
Oh my gosh.
destruction with the hurricane that passed
Yeah.
through there. It was
Yeah.
insane, almost unbelievable, the literal change that
Hmm.
it did to that area. So you're doing the outdoors, doing the environmental thing, getting in tune with that, but also too, you're getting these practical life skills of being able to take care of yourself and fend for yourself versus what you had experienced home life of constriction, and then also too within the Catholic school, the constriction there. What is that doing for your mental state in terms of the expanded opportunity?
Oh my God, it was like rocket fuel because when I praise my public high school teachers,
Yeah.
the professors at Northland were an order of magnitude more magnificent.
Okay.
And because it's such a small school, there's so much like it's a community. Like you call your professors by their first name and they have you to their house for potlucks and they
Okay.
hire you to dog sit and
Nice.
yeah.
So
Because
it's
it's like,
literally like a community rather
yeah,
than just the college.
absolutely. Yeah. And because you're in this brutally cold environment, you've seen Northern Exposure, right?
Yes.
There's a vibe like that at Northland,
Yeah.
where it's like a bunch of quirky ass people who don't fit in anywhere else, all of the oddballs, all of the renegades, all of the pioneers and the visionaries who are outsiders in their home environment. But now all of a sudden, it's like we're all cut from the same cloth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the professors are cut from the same cloth. And the professors are like 1,000,000% dedicated to like, how can we support you doing what you want to do and going out and having an impact in the world to meet the coming dumpster fires.
For sure. That's great. That's great. So, with going through, are you doing full 4 years there and just graduating? How does that look for you in getting through those years? Did you find a group of friends that helped get you through that as well as you had in high school?
Yeah, fast friends because one of the brilliant things in how Northland structured things was that as a freshman coming in, you were put into a block. It was called freshman block. And everyone who had a declared major got put into a block. And so there were maybe 20 of us in the outdoor ed block, maybe 25 of us. And what they did was they put you all in the exact same classes. So
Ah,
your schedule matched exactly.
yeah.
So those were your people. And the way that it was set up was you'd have 4 days of classes, Monday through Thursday, and then Friday through Sunday you would be off campus doing something outdoors, whether it was learning orienteering or whether it was learning going rock climbing or whether it was setting up a fake situation where you had to put your CPR and EMT skills to the test, or testing river water to see like the health of the water. Like it was like
Yeah.
a sampler, was a
Yeah.
sampler. So Monday through Friday, and Monday through Thursday, you're in class. And then Friday through Sunday, you're out in the field
Mm.
doing something. And it was something different every time. And it was meant to be a taster. It was meant to be a sampler so that you could say, wow, this really fascinates me. I'm going to choose this specialty. Or this really fascinates me. So I'm going to choose this specialty. Because under the outdoor ed umbrella, there were like 7 specialties. So they wanted to give you a taste of each. But what it did was, so in my block, there were maybe like 7 of us that kind of glommed together, and half of us, more than half of us, were from New Jersey.
Okay.
And so, yeah, they were my best friends for the whole 4 years. It was like we were like siblings of the best sort.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
And I also took a lot of art classes too. I took a lot of ceramics, pottery, photography. I loved my photography class. Like my photography professor was like, "You're gifted. You need to, I want to see you do something with this. How can I help you?"
Okay.
That kind of a thing. So like making you come to my office and let's strategize kind of a thing.
Nice.
Yeah, and that was a hobby that I carried forward through, I guess, until smartphones came along. Like my digital SLR camera bit the dust and I never replaced it because I had my smartphone. But yeah, so photography has always been a love of mine as well, like art photography.
Yeah. Okay. So I was curious about that if art came into play while you're doing the environmental stuff.
Well,
How
the
did,
writing too, because it was a declared major, the writing was an art form for me too.
yes. Yes. And are you learning to write for a particular field of profession, or was it just a generalized creative writing?
It was in the mold of the Transcendentalists, the John Muir and the John Muirs and the Thoreaus and the Barry Lopez was also, I was a big fan of Barry Lopez, who was more of a modern transcendentalist. But
Yeah.
really, when I say transcendentalist, what I mean by that is people who write about nature as an entry point to a spiritual connection. And and also with this through line of stewardship, like how can we write about the environment in a way that empowers people to care about the environment and to take action.
Yeah.
So I was also very interested in the Monkey Wrench gang and the all the kind of guerrilla environmentalism and Greenpeace and all of those sorts of things. Like I was, it was very much like politically motivated, but also spiritually grounded and spiritually motivated.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's an interesting dynamic too, because from my perspective, I haven't seen a whole lot of the environmentalists outside of native cultures that have implemented the spiritual aspect,
Hmm.
working with the environment, protecting the environment, being connected to the environment. So it's interesting that was part of the study that you were experiencing.
Yeah, Northland had a Native American Studies major that, and you could also get a minor in it. And I took a lot of classes in that department. I probably was maybe two classes short of a minor in Native American studies, so I had a deep affinity for the worldview of Native Americans. The it was the Chippewa
Mm.
Ojibwe
Yeah.
tribe up there, and so the professors in that department were all Native American elders. And this one man in particular, Joe Rose, who actually that image right behind you that you created
No,
is Joe Rose. That is Joe Rose. He looks just like that.
this is by an artist out of Oklahoma.
Oh,
This
oh,
isn't
I
my,
thought you did that one.
no, he's a Cherokee artist named Brian Waylett,
Mm,
and he
yeah,
created that. So it's a
yeah,
bit of a pop culture mashup.
yeah, it's gorgeous. Very powerful. But
Yeah.
that was the experience I had was it was very powerful to learn at the knee of a Native American elder. He was in his 60s at the time, and he wasn't a poser. He wasn't like an academic. He was half the time he was more than half the time he was late to class because he'd be crossing the quad and end up talking to somebody and getting into a philosophical conversation and then like a very different relationship to time,
Yeah.
which I actually all of us really respected. There was a certain, oh, Joe's late again. We'll just sit here and chat amongst ourselves. And he frequently went over, like he didn't honor. And so I thought that was just like this radical thing. Oh, I can even have a different relationship to time, and that's okay. Like that's freeing. And just learning all about the cultural traditions and the spirituality. So it was a very much, and also like just the stewardship piece was a through line through everything because that was Northland's mission was that everything you learn here is about stewardship of the environment.
Yeah.
And then also taking a lot of classes in Eastern religions. And
Okay.
one of my professors there was really like a almost like a Rhodes Scholar level expert on Buddhism and Taoism. So getting that exposure and having that worldview open up. And so it very quickly became the world is a giant, beautiful, magical, amazing place. And whatever worldview I had as a child was like one little grain of sand on
Yeah.
all the world's oceans. So mind expanding. And I cannot imagine having had a better college experience than I had.
Yeah.
Everything about it was just hitting it out of the park.
And was that starting to answer those questions from childhood and being in the Catholic school environment where you felt you weren't getting the full information and it didn't sound quite right? This now validating. Okay.
100%.
Okay.
100%. I
Okay.
mean, the Native American worldview is such a, there's so much wisdom there that's just tried and true and cannot be argued with. There's so much in organized religion that is arguable. There is, in my view, nothing in Native American spirituality that you can argue with. Everything has this ring of truth to it with a capital T and in your body and in your heart and in your feet. Like you can feel it. This is so grounding and it's so, you can just, it's this warm current of this warm river where you can just relax into the current and be supported and buoyed by it and feel like carried downstream to more and more places of beauty and connection. And that, talk about opposite. When you have this reductionist, sort of fear based, very misogynistic, anti woman, the kind of anti woman messaging that I got as a child is it's legit abusive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that took a long time to unwind. I think I was probably in my late 20s, early 30s before I was like, oh, I think I finally got like the tightest knot out of that. And now I can get the rest of the knots out.
Okay. Okay. So as you're nearing the end of college, what is your mindset in terms of what you're planning to do to move forward into
Mhm.
your new life outside of school?
Yeah, that question can be answered by actually going back into my college experience around my sophomore year.
Okay.
And I had told you I told you this story when we had our little pre-meeting,
Yeah,
but I want to tell it again for the
please,
audience, for the
please do.
listeners, just because it was such an aha for me, and I think if somebody can go, "Oh, I didn't know you could do that."
Yeah,
It would have saved me a lot of time if somebody had said that to me. Although in retrospect, you need every step of the journey
sure.
to get to where you are. So I really wouldn't change it given the opportunity. But so when I first went to Northland, I declared outdoor writing as my major under the outdoor ed department. And then about doing all of these sampler experiences on the weekends, I thought I really want to work with what they called at that time special populations. That was the label that they gave to differently abled people, whether it was juvenile delinquents, which is what they called them at the time, or people with developmental disabilities, or people with hearing loss, or amputees, or youth at, or did I say youth at risk? Yeah, youth at risk. And I was like, I really am interested in. Have you heard of Outward Bound?
It sounds familiar.
So what it is, wilderness experiences, extended wilderness experiences, like 30-day programs where outdoor leaders will take you out who are skilled in group process and communication, and you and the environment and physical challenges like rock climbing and rappelling and whitewater canoeing and those sorts of like physical things will create a setting where you can do personal growth and development.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
Personal growth and development can be facilitated. So it's not like the camps that like Paris Hilton was sent to.
Right, yeah, I'm with,
Or Chad Frankie. It was like these are legit above board, non-abusive,
right.
expansive, holistic, grounded sorts of. So I wanted to be an outward bound leader working with youth at risk,
Okay,
which was actually the seed of that was my mom signing up for that program where the kid from the urban environment came in to live in the suburban environment.
yeah,
I was like, I want to do that. So there was a period of time, like maybe half a term or a term, where I was declared major for outdoor ed, but the specialization was special populations. And so I proceeded along those lines, and part of that degree core program was you were required to take these two classes. One was called winter camping, and the other one was called winter block. And the winter block required you to live for 3 months in the snow.
okay,
Yeah,
yeah. In Wisconsin.
in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And actually, it was northern Minnesota, but yeah,
Oh, North
that was
Minnesota.
that was
Okay.
yeah. So I'm like, all right, I'll do the winter camping, which was just a week. I think it was maybe 10 days, and it was on Christmas break, so I didn't have to go home for Christmas break my freshman year,
Yeah.
which was nice because I didn't want to spend Christmas with my family anyway. So that whole time was spent winter camping
Okay.
in the Boundary Waters canoe area, which is between like northern Minnesota and Canada. It's like right on the border there. It straddles, I believe. And in December, on my period,
Gee.
someone who hates the cold. And it was so basically you're on skis, the lakes are frozen, covered with snow. You're on skis and you're pulling a sled that's strapped onto you with all your gear, your food, your tent, whatever. And then we spend hours a day pulling these sleds, and then we'd set up camp. And I think there was one point where we set up camp where we actually were going to stay in this one location for 3 nights instead of one night. And because we had to learn the skill of how to build a quinzhee. Do you know what a quinzhee is?
I do not.
So it's a variation on the theme of an igloo.
Okay.
You take snow and you build a big giant mound that's 6 feet tall, like giant, like as big as this room. So like maybe 15 feet by 15 feet and about 10 feet tall. And then you pack it down as you're doing. And then once that's done, you go in and you start digging out from under
Okay. Yeah.
until you create an igloo.
I'm with you. Okay.
And then you sleep in there.
Nice.
And the idea is that it won't go below 32 there.
Got it.
But if you're sleeping in a tent, it was like, there was like wind chill of like -60.
Right. Yeah.
And you're in a tent, so you're a little protected. But anyway, so it was like, this is how, anyway.
It creates that insulation
Yeah, and no
element.
wind, and it's just, yeah. And also your body heat is warming it up as well because you have a bunch of people sleeping in there like sardines next to each other.
Yeah.
Anyway, I got back from that trip and I said, I am never, ever, ever going winter camping again. So
Yeah.
that meant that the program that I was in, I wouldn't be able to finish it because that 3 month was requisite.
Okay.
So I was distraught because I had already changed my major twice. And I went and looked through the course catalog and I didn't really see anything else that compelled me. And I was like, I do not want to leave Northland. This is my home. These people are my heart family.
Yeah.
Even though I hate the cold, there's so much warmth here. There's so much human warmth
Yeah.
that I'm literally plugged in to things that I didn't even know existed in terms of spiritual nourishment and emotional nourishment and social nourishment and feeling like this bigger purpose, like of what I want to do with my life. I can't imagine leaving here. So I'm like having a breakdown and I go to one of my professors who was the head of the Peace Studies department.
Yeah.
So not only did they have Native American studies, but you could also get a degree in conflict resolution and peace studies.
Okay.
And so he was my advisor. Like I was assigned him when I came in as a freshman, which was interesting because I didn't declare any interest in conflict resolution and peace studies, but I think they do that on purpose so that you can have a different flavor. And his name was Kent Shifford. And I remember going to Kent in tears, going, I don't want to do winter block in Minnesota, and I don't want to leave Northland, and I don't see anything that I want to study. Help.
Yeah.
And he took me into the Peace Studies conference room with this big conference table and laid out 3 sheets of flip chart paper in the middle of the conference table and had a bucket of magic markers and dumped them out. And he said, what do you love? And he started mind mapping all of these
Yeah.
things. Like I was
Yeah.
saying, I love this and I took this class and I love that. And when Joe Rose said this, like that really resonated and blah, blah, blah. And so he spent like an hour or more with me doing this. And then at the end of that, he handed me the Northland course catalog and a highlighter. And he said, go back to your dorm and we're going to meet next week on Tuesday. Bring it back. I want you to go through the course catalog. I want you to read every single class, read this entire book. It was like maybe
Oh
that
wow.
thick.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I want you to highlight every single class that has a course description where you go, you know what, that sounds interesting.
Okay.
And so I did. I followed his instructions to the T and I came back on Tuesday and he spent about 10 minutes looking through what I had highlighted. And he said, why don't we design a program that enables you to take all of these classes? And I was like, what? He's, yeah, you can have a self-designed major. And I was
Nice.
like, how come nobody told me about this? And I don't know, maybe they didn't want to advertise it too much because it's more work.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, if you can come up with a rationale for what the through line is for all of the classes that you've highlighted, and if you can write that rationale in a compelling way and
Hmm.
give it a title, give it a name, what is the name of your degree?
Yeah.
If you can get 3 major professors to sign on that are in the departments of the classes that you like, we will then present it to this larger committee and they will review it and they will approve or disapprove it. And I was like, that sounds great, but I don't really see any through lines here. And he said, I do. And he
Okay.
pulled out the mind map pages from the week prior, and then he started drawing in more stuff, filling in the information of the highlighting from the course catalog book. And what I ended up with was 4 minors:
Okay.
sociology, cultural anthropology, psychology, and philosophy.
Mm.
And I was, interestingly enough, 1 course shy of having like a psychology degree. And that class was statistics.
Oh man.
And I didn't want to take statistics. And I'm glad I didn't take statistics. But anyway, so here's the theme, and then I still have all the papers from this experience in a folder in the garage in the
Well,
filing cabinet. And so we called it holistic human development because it was how do we take the ills, the dis-ease
yeah,
of the human experience and transform it, transcend it, and move beyond it and heal.
yeah,
It's like the ills of society and the ills of the individual and the disconnectedness, because it was all about how do humans connect with what feeds them, whether it's spiritual, emotional, environment in the environment or with a higher power or whatever.
yes.
Healing childhood wounds and all of that. And my intention was actually to go to grad school in Berkeley at the California Institute of Integral Studies because they had a counseling psychology program that was called transpersonal counseling psychology. Now they call it something else. But it was that, like, how do you transcend the ego and really bring in these other perspectives of spirituality and other cultures and the unknown, the unlanguaged, these
Yeah.
things that can't quite be languaged, and how do you bring that into a healing modality? So I really wanted to go into counseling psychology with all of that.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the long answer to your question.
Right. So you're able to, again, we got another person who's looking at what you've been doing and seeing that they want to help you progress further. So they come up with this out of the box way to guide you and allow you to move forward with some purpose. And once you get through all of that, you got that final degree in mind. What do you do once you graduate? What is the thing that you step into after you've done graduation and now you've got to go out and put this new education and skill sets to use?
Yeah. Yeah. I was very interested in getting to a warmer climate at that point. As much as I loved Northland and Ashland, which was the town that the college was in, and as much as I loved the North Woods and the lake, which is to live on Lake Superior is a very spiritual experience in and of itself.
Yeah,
And of course, having Joe Rose's worldview interwoven in that, like you can really see how, I mean, it is the Great Lake Gitchagumi. It's a spiritual force for Native American culture.
for sure.
And so as much as I loved all of that, I was like, get me somewhere warmer. So I wanted to be very intentional about choosing a town. So in my freshman block of those students that I was really close with, there was one boy in particular that I was very fond of.
Okay.
And by the beginning of sophomore year, we were dating. We were really close friends freshman year, and then we were dating sophomore year, and then we pretty much moved in together and then got an apartment off campus. So he was my college sweetheart, and we got engaged my senior year, and we got married our graduation weekend. So Friday was our wedding, and Sunday was graduation day. And the president of the college performed our wedding ceremony, and all of our friends were there. And it was at the Sigurd Olson Environmental Institute, which is this beautiful building on this creek. And I think we had 50 people there, and we had M&Ms. And one friend, Brad, said, "I'm not coming to the wedding unless you have Twinkies." So we had Twinkies, and it was just very hippie. It was Northland is a very much a hippie enclave.
Okay.
Like everyone there looks like they're time traveled from the 60s.
Gotcha.
Just give you a little bit more of a flavor of it.
All right.
So yeah, it was just this hippie wedding, and I was wearing this hippie dress with these hippie flowers and hippie hairdo and hippie vows. And yeah, it was like, I don't know, I think we spent like $150 on the whole wedding. And his name was Scott, and he had grown up in Hawaii. He was born in Connecticut, but they moved there when he moved to Hawaii when he was 1. So he was like this haole, like an honorary native islander.
Yeah.
And in that culture, I don't really know too much about it, but I do know that marijuana use is very common and not necessarily. And that was when marijuana was illegal, obviously. But there, it was like easier to get, and it wasn't as criminalized. Even though it was technically criminal, it wasn't as criminalized. It wasn't prosecuted. So when he was like 9 years old, he started smoking pot daily with his buddies.
Oh, wow.
So he had a daily pot habit that
Okay.
he carried, like when your brain isn't fully formed,
Yes.
that carried him through, and he still had a daily pot habit when we were together. And
Okay.
I was very anti-drug, very anti-pot, very like zealot level
Okay.
anti-drug. And because coming from an environment where addiction is rampant, I was
Sure.
like, I'm doing the opposite of that.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of struggle in that relationship over his pot smoking and my disapproval of it.
Okay.
And also just seeing how he acted as a result of it. Because, I mean, he was a very sweet human being, very heart centered, very like ooey gooey, mushy, sweet, caring. So the upside of having a marijuana influenced neural development, the downside to a marijuana influenced neurological development is that there's no, at least in his experience, no motivation or aim or focus or follow through, or just very much like in the present moment, a thing which has its own benefits to be living life in the present moment, because that's a very actually Native American blessing to be able to live life from that place. That's why Joe Rose was late to class half the time, because he's in the moment. He's having a
Right.
conversation on the quad with another student that was really interesting.
Yeah.
And so philosophically, I was like, okay, I support this, but and while you're in college, it's easy to just make that be not a big thing,
Hmm.
because I'm focused on my studies. He's doing his studies, which are different than mine. We're not in the same classes. His circle of friends is different than my circle of friends now, because we've not in that freshman block anymore, and he's now hanging out with the potheads. One of whom, from a claim to fame standpoint, one of whom was Tenzing Norgay's son. Do you
Okay.
know who Tenzing Norgay is?
I do not.
Tenzing Norgay is world famous for being Sir Edmund Hillary's Sherpa in summiting Everest for the first time ever.
Okay.
So this was like a big thing in the 50s to summit Everest.
Yeah.
And it was Sir Edmund Hillary, who was this British mountaineer and explorer in the imprint of the great British explorers and also colonialists, and his Nepalese Sherpa. And he was Sir Edmund Hillary was a good egg, and so he lifted up his Sherpa as a co-celebrity. And
Okay.
so in certain circles, that's especially in Northland circles where so many people were in the environment, into mountain climbing, into extreme sports and extreme pushing themselves. So he was a celebrity on campus, this
Oh,
man's son.
gotcha.
And he was one of his smoking buddies. He's actually gone on to do amazing things in terms of environmental impact.
Okay.
But Scott, on the other hand, didn't. We got married, and I was like, you know what? I want to live in a place where it's warm, but it has the same kind of strong sense of community as Northland. At that point, I was like, I'm still interested in grad school, but I don't think I want to live in Berkeley. I don't think I want that kind of urban experience, even though I had written my degree to make sure that I could get into the grad program there. Anyway, so we had a short list of towns: Boulder, Nevada City, Grass Valley, Ashland, Oregon, not to be confused with Ashland, Wisconsin, which was where we lived,
Okay.
and Olympia, Washington, and Corvallis, Oregon. So we packed up our truck. Everything we owned fit in this little Ford Ranger. And
Gotcha.
we adopted two little littermates, little lab mix littermates, because one of our summer jobs was to work at this summer camp for kids. And we stayed on extra long after the season ended. I was leading canoe trips for 11 and 12-year-olds in the wilderness of Minnesota. That was
Okay.
my job the summer after junior year and the summer after senior year. I was leading canoe trips with kids in the days before vinyl tents. Like they were canvas tents. But yeah, so I had a short list. Here's what I want. I want a town that's no bigger than this, no smaller than that, has a food co-op, that has a progressive political climate, that has the things a hippie would want, and is has a really vibrant downtown and has a strong yoga community and a holistic health community and all that. So I literally went to the library, and this was in the age before the internet. Like this was like computers were just invented like the year before, and it was word processors, DOS with the two floppy disks like you
Yeah.
had to put in. It wasn't even a computer, it was a word processor. And so yeah, so I went to the library and I was literally like places rated almanac. What's the weather like? What's the population? How are people voting there? And came up with this short list. So when we packed up our truck with our two puppies, oh yeah, so the story was we were dog sitting for the caretakers of the camp after the season was over, and I accidentally, they told me, if your only job is to keep these two dogs apart because one of them is in heat, and
Mm.
I failed. And
Um,
so I felt bad, and they had puppies, and so I was like, all right, I have to help them. So I took two puppies. So we had two little puppies, Jake and Ellie, in the back of our Ford Ranger. We went and we stayed in Boulder for a while because he had a cousin there. And then we went to Grass Valley, Nevada City, because his parents lived there. And then we stayed there for a while, and then we went up to Ashland, Oregon, and we said nope, the wood stove inversion is too toxic here. We can't live here. And oh, and Eugene, Oregon was also on the list. We went to Eugene and stayed there for a while, and then kept going to Corvallis. So we just went up, up I-5 here. And we had some friends that graduated from Northland that were in our core group of friends that had gone on to grad school at Oregon State University in Corvallis. So we had a floor to crash on, and so we stayed there for long enough to realize that this was it. We didn't need to go any further. We didn't need to look at Olympia. And immediately got ensconced in this wonderful, extended, warm, hippie community.
okay.
And it was like, okay, we're done. And so at that point, I got a job, a job immediately because we had spent all this money doing this cross country thing, and all my work study money had run out. And
Right.
so I got a job at Oregon State University at the bookstore because, of course, books were my lifesaver.
Yeah.
And one of my work study jobs in college, my freshman year, was working at the campus print shop. So I had some knowledge base there. So I ended up working in the print shop in the basement of the bookstore.
Okay.
And it was in the bindery and a print, like a press before
Press
digital
ring.
printing,
Yeah.
and bindery where you're like putting books together for other students and professors. And it was a research university. So there's a lot of books being written and produced, like academic books. And I worked there. I got the job in early December. And by early January, I was enrolled in massage school because that was
Yeah.
something that I was always interested in, was like these holistic healing methods and like Reiki and all of that. And so I was working full time and going to school part time. And so it took me 2 years to finish the hours for the massage license. And then when I got my license, I went into private practice part time while I kept my full time job. And then gradually over the subsequent years, probably took from the time I got my license, it probably took about 4 years where my private practice was built up enough that I could quit my job at the bookstore at Oregon State.
Okay.
And they were really flexible with hours. So it was, and I loved working there, and my coworkers were amazing. Again, amazing community.
Yeah.
That's like the theme, like something I didn't experience in my formative years.
Yeah.
So yeah, I lived there for 15 years
Okay.
and had a private massage practice. And then that developed into learning about taking workshops in the healing arts and learning all about like energy healing, and
All
because
the
it was
different modalities.
always like the priority was always like how to bring ease to myself and to others, how to bring healing to myself and others, and how to basically, I was a personal growth hobbyist and a
Yeah.
personal growth junkie and a personal growth. This is my life. I study this and I offer it professionally and I do it for myself all the time. That was my thing. And it still is really, really pretty much to this day. I consider myself a personal growth hobbyist.
Did the creative side of you play into doing that business in terms of did you create your own logo for the business? Did you create your own promo material?
I did.
That
Yeah.
type of thing. Okay.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And that was something I really enjoyed doing. And my office, my massage space was inside of a yoga studio. They had some extra rooms like at the back of the building.
Yeah.
So I would go to yoga classes in between clients, and the yoga community was, again, just, it was Iyengar yoga, and it was like old school Iyengar yoga where this is a lifestyle and this is a spiritual practice. This isn't an exercise or fitness modality. This is bigger and more encompassing than that. And that was that community was like. And so everybody was very like a devotee, like devoted. And so I was doing lots of yoga workshops anytime they'd bring in a visiting teacher. And then always myself, like at a certain point, I became very interested in feng shui. So I went and got feng shui certification, and then I was doing that, and then that needed a logo, and that was in the, I'm going to say the mid 90s. So then now you're starting to get like the first Macintosh computers and websites and designing, and every time I would iterate and rebrand and do my own stuff, like that was part of the fun of it, was like creating the physical, the branding and the physical, the brochures, the logo, the website. And then at a certain point, other people will be like, can you do that for me?
Okay.
So it was nice because, oh, I get to bring in my design eye of other people, and also just my ability to really listen. What is it that what is it that you're about, and what is it that you're doing in the world? What's your unique genius, and how is it different from the other dime a dozen body workers? Because Corvallis being a progressive little enclave, and me being in that world of alternative and holistic healing arts, it's what makes you different from the 50 other massage therapists in this town.
And two, you're looking at it from the perspective of how can I help you stand out
Yeah.
with the creative abilities that you have and your branding and different things like that. With the experience of your early home life and how that was in conflict with who you were personally on a spiritual level and just a level of understanding. Now you're into a marriage where you're doing healing work, stepping into massage therapy and Reiki and different things like that. And you're doing the creative side of things too, with branding and brochures and any kind of promotional materials, that type of stuff. How is that other side of the home life in marriage playing into your mindset? Because you stated you were against it, and it was a kind of a point of tension
Mhm.
within that
Mhm.
relationship. How is that starting to affect your mind as you're getting more into the healing side of things, of
Mhm.
where it's a different purpose-driven lifestyle versus what your husband, his kind of I'm always in the vibe mindset
Mhm.
in terms of a structural view of things? How did
Yeah,
how
as you
did
might imagine, the marriage didn't withstand the forces of
time?
the real world.
Okay,
We arrived in Corvallis in late November, early December. He tried to get a job, didn't really want a job.
sure.
We had a very affordable place to live, so it wasn't like we had a do or die situation that really would force him, even though I was just making barely above minimum wage and also putting myself through massage school
Hmm.
at the same time. And massage school was in Eugene and we lived in Corvallis. That's a commute. It's like an hour commute. So I wasn't around much, but he was at home all the time, high, watching TV
Mm.
for months. Probably the first, easily, let's say five, we'll say 5 months after I got my job and started massage school. And he was like, nobody wants to hire me. I can't get a job, but he's not applying.
Yeah,
And so that he finally did get a job working because his degree was in outdoor ed with a naturalist specialty. So he did get a job as an outdoor educator at a school for, it was outdoor school, that was the name of it. and it was about an hour from where we lived, and it was residential. So that meant, and it was for fourth graders. So he would go during the week. What it was, they would take a class, like a grade, like all the fourth graders in this school get to go to outdoor school for a week. So they would take them as residential. The kids would come and stay in these cabins, and he was the resident naturalist. And so he would go Sunday night and come back Friday night for probably 6 months, maybe.
Okay.
And during that time, he fell in love with one of his coworkers, and
Mm,
that coworker fell in love with him.
okay.
And so they had an affair, and then eventually he asked for a divorce, and he ended up moving to Portland to be with her, and they ended up getting married. The marriage didn't last very long. But yeah, we got a divorce. We had been married, I think, a year and 3 months
Oh, wow.
after having been in relationship for 3 years before we got married. So the whole relationship was just under 5 years.
Yeah, yeah,
Plus a year of friendship on top of that. And I was truly in love with him. So that was a really difficult transition.
sure.
But at the same time, I don't want to be where somebody doesn't want me. My mother was
Correct.
created the environment of I don't want you. So as soon as it became apparent that there was no repair for
Uh,
this fracture, I was like, okay, let's do it. Let's get her done. And then he moved to Portland, and we split our meager belongings. I got both the dogs.
okay.
And yeah, he went on his merry way. And then I was like, oh, I can't afford this apartment by myself. So I put an ad on up at the university to get a roommate, which was very common in a university town. And
Sure.
so a grad student moved in with me who was in the forestry department at OSU. And long story short, we some time later ended up in a relationship, ended up falling in love and being in a relationship. And then we were in a relationship for about 3 years.
Okay.
And when he finished his graduate degree, he got a job in California and moved. And we did a little long distance thing for a while, but then eventually just became friends because of, yeah.
Too difficult.
Yeah. So I think I was like 25, 26 when we broke up. And then I met, and this was in the era of very breaking up with Paul, who was the forestry student. First of all, he opened up a whole world to me too, because it's like being a forestry student at OSU, like there was a lot of overlap in our worldview, even though essentially a forester is a tree farmer for pulp and paper. He's not living in the woods like Thoreau, which is what I
Yeah.
thought forestry was. But yeah, so we were very simpatico on a lot of levels, and he was just a really fun-loving person that really taught me about prioritizing joy and fun, which was something that was a different flavor. Like Scott, my husband, had always been very like that Hawaiian spirit, very lighthearted, very accepting and just easy. There was an ease to his way of being in the world, but Paul brought this like joy and fun and sense of adventure. And so it was really a lovely growth experience. We came away from that relationship. It wasn't a heartbreaking breakup. It was like, oh, we're really good friends and we're going to stay good friends. And so it felt really good. And so basically I was going through massage school in that relationship with Paul, and he was very supportive of everything I did and took care of the dogs while I was away and all that kind of thing. It was a good place to land.
Okay. And how is the business going at that point? And also, too, with you going through this transition, how is that potentially affecting the business?
Yeah, so one of the things that being a lover of community, which is actually how you and I met, right?
Yeah, correct.
Was through our mutual love of community, and how do we create community? How do
Yeah,
you create community for artists in recovery? How do I create community for my people, my audience, my tribe, whatever you
yeah,
want to call it? Being in massage school and meeting more and more people who were in the healing arts locally, and just loving them as people and being supportive of them, feeling supported by them. It's like, how can we create some structure to this support? And so this fellow massage student, Leon Dunham, and I, who were doing the commuting, there was a few of us who were commuting from Corvallis to Eugene for the training, for the schooling, and which was also really fun. I loved massage school majorly. I was like, you know what? Why don't we create like a guild, like a healing arts guild? We'll call it the Corvallis Healing Arts Guild, and we'll support each other in doing our marketing. We'll support each other in growing our businesses. We'll support each other and we'll trade we'll
This is
trade work.
fabulous. Yeah,
Yeah, and we'll just create a platform for having a bigger voice so that more people can learn about what we're offering.
yeah.
And so that's what I did. I created the Corvallis Healing Arts Guild, and one of the first things I did was create a brochure. That was a directory. This was again
The
pre
internet.
pre-internet,
Yeah,
pre-graphic design programs,
yeah, yeah.
And so we literally worked with this local print shop because I worked at a print shop, so I knew
Yes.
all the language and I knew like how to lay it out and I knew compositing and I knew working at the light table, like all that stuff. And so we created this pamphlet that was like probably, I don't know, I think there were maybe 50 of us in there, and where here's your phone number, here's your address, here's the description of your modality, here's a photo, here's the name of your business, here's your training credentials. And we just printed like hundreds of them, full color, and
Nice.
just started like distributing them and created a monthly meeting. And that was like so
Right.
fun because we're building community and we're supporting each other. And that was actually the beginning of me doing what would now today be called mastermind groups and success teams.
Okay.
So I took the fun of facilitating those groups and I transferred it over to women solopreneurs.
All right.
So who's running a business in Corvallis who's a woman who doesn't have any employees, who's just doing it by herself? And then so that kind of morphed into like year after year, I would iterate and have these new groups where I was facilitating round robins and how can we support each other and where are you stuck and how can the group help get you unstuck, and creating little accountability buddying and accountability partnerships. And so that has been a theme through my life aside with this. And of course, all of that, the graphic design piece, of course, is morphing as time goes by and more
Right.
technologies are available to us to do that.
Yeah.
So here I am, almost 60 years old, and I'm still doing exactly what I was doing in my 20s in Corvallis, but to a different level. But it's working with healing arts people, working with women solopreneurs, and creating community and supporting one another, not just me as somebody who has expertise and you're going to hire me, but also how can we create a circle, a women's circle. Not to say that there haven't been men in the mix at various times throughout the years, but it's my focus has always been women by and large, which actually came a bit out of that childhood wound too, because
I was
um,
just thinking of this.
yeah, at a certain point, it was like men aren't safe. Men are safe, women are not. And at a certain point, I looked around my life and I realized all of my close friendships are men. And I don't have any women friends. And I went, I want to fix this. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to heal whatever it is that's driving it.
Okay.
And I'm going to make a change. And then it became like this whole world opened up of like sisterhood. Yeah.
And what I'm seeing here too as well is the earlier path of potentially going into the the nunhoodship, right?
Yeah.
Being surrounded by only the women within the bubble of that
Right.
convent. You left that, you changed directions and went away from that. Now you're finding a whole new community that has a spiritual element to it and a spiritual connection to it that is not confined, but is open and broad
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
allows for expanded thought
Mhm.
and different things like that. But you're incorporating the creativity that you've always had as well, which again, a lot of my early graphic design experience started off exactly the same way. I would take my designs and my drawings to the local print shop and say, this is what I want to create with this. And they were so fascinated by what I was bringing in just by not using a computer, just basic skill set of layout and creation and design on my own that I just figured out because I had very little of that at college. They saw that in me and wanted to nourish that. So they would just invite me into the back where all the presses were
Yeah.
and say, hey, just come
Yeah.
here and watch your project get
Mhm.
printed so you understand what the process is like. So you understand the next design thing that you create, then you understand how it needs to be produced and finished off. So that experience has always stuck with me, and I've experienced those things as well, going into multiple genres of the creative
Mhm.
field, whether it's
Mhm.
fashion, whether it's jewelry, whether it's the entertainment stuff. It's all because of being in those environments first, and then people seeing my creative talents and saying, what if you did this? Or here, let me show you this so you can understand it more. And then it just expands out from there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's fascinating to see those circles taking
Yeah,
place.
to just see how there was never a misstep on the path. Like me getting a work study job as a freshman at Northland in the print shop.
Yeah,
That and learning like cut and paste layouts and
yeah,
like literal cut and paste with an
yep,
X-Acto knife and the little white tape
yep,
and then landing in Corvallis with what can I do here? Oh, I've worked in a print shop. Oh, there's a print shop looking for to hire.
yeah,
Of course, that print shop was a lot bigger and a lot more developed and more people working there, but then having all those years of the behind the scenes of like old school graphic design and having the actual experience of taking my good eye, my good artist's eye, and applying it to graphic design, and then seeing how that then carried forward and working as a massage therapist, wanting to help my fellow Healing Arts Guilds members. I can design a business card for you. I know how to do that.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So with the community that you're building and you're helping these other solopreneurs and that type of thing, how is that moving you forward through life at that point? Because I'm saying you're approximately in your mid 30s ish around that time. And how is that creating potential decisions of how you want to move forward and where you're going to move forward?
Mhm. Yeah, when I was living in Oregon, so I lived there for 15 years and I moved there in 88, maybe a little less than 15 years. And the first 3 years that I lived there, the gray skies really didn't seem to impact my mental health.
Okay.
But after about the fourth or fifth year, each year got worse and it actually became like completely debilitating, the seasonal affective disorder.
Yeah.
And I was having thoughts of not wanting to be here.
Okay.
I won't say that I was suicidal, but I just wished that I was dead a lot of the time.
Sure.
I just didn't want to be alive. And I remember, so being a very naturally nurturing personality person, massage therapist in the healing arts, interested in counseling, really interested in giving and receiving the nourishment of community. Like I'm a certain type of person, right?
Yeah.
So I'm driving down the road in February in Oregon on a fairly busy street in Corvallis that it's like 45 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour speed limit. And there's a lot of cyclists. I was actually a bike commuter for 10 of the 14 years that I lived there and didn't even own a car. And so there's a cyclist in the bike lane on this busy road and I feel myself wanting to turn the steering wheel
Okay.
to hit this cyclist. I wanted to blow up my life
Yeah.
because I needed help and I wanted help and I didn't. I had done all the natural things of trying to deal with the seasonal effect. I did the light box, I did the St. John's wort, I did the making sure I got outside for a hike every day. I did like I'm seeing a naturopath and I'm doing herbs and I'm doing yoga therapy and I'm doing all the things
Yeah.
and nothing was helping. And this happened. And I didn't, like, nothing moved. My hands didn't move. But the fact that that thought planted itself in my head, and I was like, full stop, I need professional help.
Gotcha.
I got home and I made some calls.
Okay.
I'm like, this is, we're in a different zone here.
Sure.
I'm thinking about not being alive and I'm thinking about
Harming someone else.
harming someone else
Yeah.
when I am not cut from that cloth. So, yeah, I got an appointment with a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner and started working with her. She diagnosed me with cyclothymia and obviously depression.
Yeah.
And cyclothymia, I don't know if you're familiar with that diagnosis.
I have not heard of it.
So it's like a little, I think of it like as a little sister to bipolar disorder.
Okay.
So just mood swings that are very labile.
Gotcha.
And of course, just the seasonal affective disorder. So we spent about 5 years trying all different combinations of pharmaceutical SSRIs
Got it.
to treat that. And that, of course, was in the mid 90s, where I don't know if it's different nowadays. I would hope it is, but nothing worked.
Yeah. No,
Nothing worked.
it's not different. It's not different.
Nothing worked. We tried all combinations, we tried different titrations. All it did was make me feel like I was a zombie,
Yeah. Same.
incapable of orgasm zombie. And I was like, this is not an improve. And also, I still didn't feel great.
Right.
This
Right.
is not an improvement.
Yeah.
So I've traded one set of horrible problems for another set of horrible problems. And so at that point, I was like, I have to move to a sunnier climate.
Yeah.
And it was a gut wrenching decision and a very long, drawn out decision making process because I was, again, I didn't want to leave Northland. I didn't want to leave Corvallis because it was Norman Rockwellian. If you've never been to Corvallis, it is, if somebody were to come in with a paintbrush, like Buckminster Fuller were to come in with a paintbrush and design like the perfect little idyllic community on the Willamette River, gorgeous downtown, vibrant alternative community, amazing food co-op where I volunteered once a week, and yoga community where they were just like world-class yoga teachers, and just an adorable downtown. I lived in this cute little historic little cottage a mile from my massage space, and I didn't own a car, and it was like ride my bike to the co-op and get groceries and ride my bike to the yoga studio and see my clients, and like a mile from campus so I could still keep my job at Oregon State University, and cute little house, wonderful friends who adored me, clients who were devoted. I mean, everything. But I could not function.
Yeah.
So I did the same thing as I did when I was a senior in college. I went to the research brain that I have and I said, what do I want in a community? And I had my list of non-negotiables, and I had a short list of places I would consider moving to: Tucson, San Diego, Asheville, because I had fallen in love with Asheville when I was in college.
Okay.
That was pretty much it. Because I didn't want to live landlocked, so I wouldn't consider Boulder, and I wouldn't, even Asheville was a stretch because it is an 8 hour drive to the ocean. And
Okay.
I'd never lived further than 45 minutes from a major body of water. So I was like, this is important to me from a spiritual standpoint. And so even Asheville was a stretch because it was 8 hours to the beach. But so I made the decision that I was going to move and I was going to go and visit each of these places and see which one spoke to me. And then my sister had her first baby, and the relationship that I was in at the time, which was an 8 year relationship with the love of my life after Paul, his name was Craig, that relationship ended because he didn't want kids and he didn't want to get married. And I was in my early 30s at the time. We met when I was 25. I was in my early 30s at the time, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure I want to be married again and I might want to have kids. So that relationship ended just from that, which was gut wrenching because
Sure.
he truly was like my bodhisattva, love of my life. like I'm done, you know? And so, yeah, so it was a breakup of losing my community, losing my business, right?
Yeah.
Losing my best friends, losing my love of my life, losing just the environment of how beautiful it was there, because Western Oregon is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
It feels like the Garden of Eden. If you died and went to heaven, and this is what the Garden of Eden looks like. So my sister had her first baby, and I was like, interesting, 'cause she's younger than me, and now that was in July, June of 2001. And in September of 2001, we know what happened, 9/11. And my dad was a limo driver at that time in Manhattan.
Okay.
And we couldn't get in touch with him for 8 hours, or maybe it was longer than that. Maybe it was 12 hours. It felt like forever. Of course, the feeling of that, turning on the TV and seeing that, and then realizing, oh, my dad is in Manhattan. Not a man that I'm close to, but it's still like when something like that happens, you feel the weight of it as human to human, not as like father to daughter.
Correct.
And just the enormity of it. I'm sure we can all remember where we were when we heard the news,
Yep.
and my mother calling me and saying, have you heard what happened? And we can't get in touch with your dad. That was in the early days of cell phones. So all cell communication was shut. So with my sister having her first child, me deciding I needed to get to a sunnier climate, 9/11 happening, New Jersey's pretty sunny. I know that. I lived there for 18 years. So I made the decision to give New Jersey 2 years. And
Yeah.
I moved back to my childhood home, my childhood bedroom, and had to rebuild my life from scratch in a really different milieu that was as opposite of what I was coming from.
Right.
And yeah, the girl can talk.
All right. So you're back in New Jersey. The world is in chaos, and you said you picked up a graphic design job. And so, how do things, first of all, how does those 8 hours of not being able to be in contact with your father, how is that affecting everybody from a mental standpoint?
Oh, yeah. It was sheer chaos and sheer, because it's not just, oh, dad's not picking up his phone. It's like hundreds and hundreds of people are dead.
Yeah,
Dad could be one of them. And like, when is the next? You know how it was in those following days? It was like, when is the next attack and where is it going to be?
sure.
And yeah, so it was pretty. Because I moved back on October 10th.
Okay.
So it was like, what is that? Like a month after it?
Yeah.
Yeah. But he was fine.
Okay.
He was fine. In fact, he flew to Oregon, terrified of flying, but flew to Oregon so that he could help me drive the U-Haul back across the country.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's interesting. So you're seeing at that point kind of a new side of your dad, maybe, in terms of some
Yeah,
generosity.
yeah, because at that point, I believe I was a freshman in college when he went cold turkey. A white knuckling recovery, or white knuckling alcoholic is what they call it,
Okay.
where you don't work a program, you don't get any kind of help, you don't get any therapy, you don't do anything to support yourself, you just stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. He replaced it with rageaholism and
Okay.
also a food addiction. He became morbidly obese.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, not having those support structures turn into other
Yeah.
addictive.
Yeah. And I do believe he had a porn addiction as well.
Okay.
So it was like he just traded one addiction for three.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. And so he's helping get you back to New Jersey, and you're going into this new job as a graphic designer. How is that potentially replacing some of the pain of having to move location, losing the relationship, moving away from your friends? Is any of that creativity helping fill some of that gap and that
Yeah,
loss?
I think it was probably this single thing that got me through those subsequent years. Because, so what I did was I got three jobs,
Okay.
three part-time jobs to equal like 70 hours a week. When they were all geographically distant, so it was a lot of commuting time, but
Okay.
it enabled me to not be home, like a
Sure.
variation of what I was doing when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And so two of the jobs were graphic design, and the other job, it's so funny, but I'm actually blanking out on what that third job was.
Okay.
What a funny thing.
That's all right.
But yeah, so I was doing graphic design and also teaching myself how to do graphic design in a computer
Got
on
it.
a PC.
Okay.
And all of my love for design during the digital era was on a Mac.
Oh
So,
yeah.
yeah, and when I applied for the job, I was like, "Oh yeah, I know all these programs," and it was a total lie. It was an absolute bullshit. And so I went in and I was like, I would stay late because it was the kind of environment where you could do that and nobody would say boo.
Yeah.
So I would stay late and just teach myself the software. And nobody even noticed.
That's fantastic. That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Still hate PCs though.
Same. We're in the same boat. That's all right. I
But
think
yeah,
that
that kind of that creativity of learning to do design all over again with new tools was really the fuel of there was like a I won't necessarily call it like joy or fun, but it was like engaging and it was interesting and it was all about like how can I create beauty with the tools that I have.
and that's a thing that I always want to try and bring to the forefront of a creative's mind, especially with this new direction I'm going in, is that creativity and being a creative person, you have the ability to bring that to the surface. If it's not just for yourself, but for others as well. And as much as you can highlight that and amplify that, that just makes the world a better place. So, are you still, at this point, are you still struggling on that mental low that you were on? And did you find any medications that worked for you or no?
No, I never did, and I never revisited the
Okay.
pharmaceutical solutions. And also moving into the sun, like immediate.
Instantaneous?
It was
Yeah, yeah.
immediate,
Okay.
immediate. But what ended up happening was my nervous system was assaulted by the pace, the energy, the density of New Jersey compared to this blissful bike free, car free existence that I was living.
Yeah.
You know, to then go from working 20 hours a week as a massage therapist, riding my bike a mile,
Yeah.
helping people bliss out one on one, to working in a corporate setting, commuting on the New Jersey Turnpike, which is literally 39 lanes wide.
Yeah.
The pace, like just even the speed, the density, having 9 million people like on top of each other. So
Concrete.
my, and I believe that illness is a metaphor and that every illness has a really potent metaphor for what you're going through. And so I developed Graves' disease, which is another way of saying hyperthyroidism. So my thyroid, my master gland went into hyperdrive,
Yeah.
and to the point where it ground me into the earth.
Oh,
And
wow.
because what it is, if you look at the blood work of somebody who's just done an Ironman, that's what my blood looked like. And I hadn't just done an Ironman triathlon. And so it was like my bloodstream was full of toxins like ketamine, ketosis. I don't know. It was something with
Yeah,
a K. It was
yeah.
something with a K, and like my whatever the K that they were measuring was like an elite athlete who had just ground himself into the ground after an Ironman triathlon. And the doctor looked at me. He's like, "Have you run a marathon recently?" I'm like, "Look at me. Do I look like a?" Oh, and I lost all this weight, and I couldn't climb a set of stairs without resting halfway up. Like I was
Oh, wow.
just,
Okay.
yeah.
Just
And it
depleted.
took completely depleted, and it took months to figure out what was going on. They thought that I had cancer, and they thought I had this, and like all these like serious ass things. And I was like, but when they finally figured it out, what they do is they give you a radioactive iodine pill, and then you ingest it, and the iodine is drawn to your thyroid gland, and it kills off a portion of the gland, but it's an inexact thing. Like they don't know, has it killed off 30%? Has it killed off 50? Has it killed off 80? So then you spend another 2 years like titrating the medication to make up for, because now you don't have a thyroid gland or it's only partially functioning. So it took me like 2 years to start feeling better.
Okay.
But when I did start feeling better, it was like I got into Ayurveda and got into. I've always had a love of bodies of water, and I got into sculling. Do you know sculling? So it's like a very thin boat, and
Yes.
it's often 6 people on a boat,
Yes.
like crew.
Yeah.
But this is just one person, one boat, and the boat is like not even as wide as your tush.
Okay.
So I really got into doing that, which was surprising because I'm not an athletic body type and I've never been athletically inclined or athletically drawn. But for some reason, this particular sport really spoke to me. And again, it was like nature and water and movement and beauty because the river was so beautiful. It's actually the Navasink River on the Jersey Shore, which is dotted with mansions where John Bon Jovi lives and Springsteen and
Yeah.
Geraldo Rivera, but it's a tidal river, so there's jellyfish. So you did not want to spill because if you spilled, you would get attacked by jellyfish. So I ended up becoming really skilled at this sport.
Okay.
And it made me really much stronger and fitter. And then with the eating Ayurvedically, it was like a new me was born at a
Right.
certain point. And then also going away, like going to the river, like the drive to the river was like a 40-minute drive, was away from the density. And so that was like fueling my my well-being.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Good. What
Yeah.
I'm seeing too is a contrast of another, a contrast of environment and a contrast of body function. Whereas you're out in the Pacific Northwest biking, which is basically all lower.
On the river, because I mean
Yeah.
the Willamette is a major river too.
Yeah. But you're basically doing all lower body work, right? Now you're out back in New Jersey, sculling,
Right.
working the upper body.
Like, it's whole body because you're like pushing off. The seat is on
It's
a
on a
track.
slide. Okay.
Yeah.
Got you. All
Mhm.
right. What? Yeah. Then, so you're then balancing out the body
Yeah.
at that
And
point.
you're flying too. Like that, the way that boat is designed, you are flying over the water. And yet you're right, like your tush is right above the water. So you feel really connected to it. And you're also, if anybody ever has a chance to try it, it's incredible. And you have to be, you cannot for a split second take your awareness away from the present moment.
Okay.
Because if you do, you will dump because it's a very long, narrow boat. And then you have these oars that are balancing you, and you're only balanced if you're moving and if you're perfectly centered. And so it's an incredible exercise for centering and presencing.
Mm.
And then there's just the bliss of the movement, and it's almost completely silent. Like you're just like the way the hull of the boat is designed, it's not really making a sound.
Right.
You have the sound of the paddle hitting the water, but even that's pretty quiet.
Right.
The
Exactly.
oar, the oar.
Exactly. Okay. So how long are you in the corporate design world before you start to potentially feel some restlessness of I need to have some kind of change? And also too, you've gone through this 2 years of healing with the
Mhm.
thyroid. You're starting to feel better as well. So is that starting to spur that inner inner compass of wanting to do something different or move on to something different?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, because I'm unemployable, really. Like, I'm not cut from the cloth that does well when other people are directing what I'm to be doing with my own energy
Yeah.
and my own creativity. I find that really suffocating.
Yes.
And so I'm not a good employee because I want to be directing, I want to be leading, I want to be deciding, I want to be, especially since the companies that I worked for, one of them was a small business. It was actually a kitchen and bath design firm, and I was doing all of their marketing.
Okay.
And so a lot of graphic design involved. And I have all these ideas for what the company needs to be doing in order to be more successful.
Mm.
But those ideas don't get brought to fruition because I'm not in charge. And they don't see the wisdom of it, or they don't see the reason to spend that money there, or they don't have the money to spend there, or whatever. And then the other company that I was working for was a larger company, and the same thing. It's like there's no room for the kind of unicorn that you are.
Yeah.
And so it's a very stifling environment. So yeah, my I was just itching to get out of there and feeling better. So I put up a profile on a dating website, match.com.
Okay.
And I believe it was like the first match that I got. We ended up going out to dinner and immediately hit it off. And I'm like, I really like this guy. And he was like, I really like you. And so we started dating, and it was like, immediately, you're my person,
Mm.
each of us. And he was in recovery. He
Okay.
was working a really aggressive recovery program. He'd been sober, clean and sober for 13 years at the time that we met. He was doing 3 meetings a week, AA, and was considered, even though that's a leaderless community, he was put on a pedestal a bit for how he was working his program and for how many sponsees he had and
Yeah, I was gonna
how,
say this moved into a sponsor position.
yeah. And he was the inviter. He was getting people in there. He was doing outreach. He was in IT himself, but he did contract work. So he'd do like a 3 month or a 6 month project, and then he'd make a lot of money, and then he'd have a few months off between projects where he would just go deep sea fishing
Right.
and very involved in the community, a small town in rural northwestern New Jersey. On the river, again, there's a theme. I'm always living on bodies of water.
Yeah.
That was the Delaware River, and also close to the Raritan River as well. So anyway, and his parents lived down the shore, so we would spend a lot of time visiting. His parents were lovely, big Italian family. And anyway, so within 4 months, I had moved up to into his little condo up there, and still kept commuting down to this job at this kitchen and bath design firm. And I was like, I can't keep doing this. So I ended up applying for another graphic design job. It was actually not, I'm sorry, it wasn't graphic design, it was design, like kitchen and bath design
Okay.
job at this other firm. It was a very high end clientele in a very wealthy part of New Jersey. Not where I lived, I commuted to it, but it was like near the Trump golf course. So it gives you an idea of the affluence of that area. And the
Sure.
clients were like, these were like $200,000 kitchen remodels
Yeah.
to start. Like that was an entry level. But I was hired as a design assistant, and I ended up working there for probably, I'm going to say 2 months before I got fired, because I was like, why are you doing it this way? This could be so much better this other way. And just like having all these ideas for how this company should be run.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I ended up doing a lot. I ended up doing 3 different job descriptions within those 2 months. Like as soon as I got onboarded, they were like, "Oh, you can do this. Oh, do that. You can do this. Okay, do that." But they never paid me more. And at a certain point, I went into HR and I'm like, "Do you realize the value I'm bringing here? And I want to be paid for this value." And they were like, "No, we're not going to be doing that." I went back to my desk and then I got a voicemail saying to come back to the HR office, and they were like, "We'd like you to resign."
Oh, wow.
So I was like, "Thank you very much. I will be resigning." But of course, they do that so they don't have to pay you unemployment. So anyway, I quit and very happily never looked back. I never ever worked for anyone ever again. And I think I was, let's see, I had to be maybe 36 or something at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, never looked back. And but I did get to see the inside of what it's like to run a design firm
Sure.
from both of those jobs. And I also saw that wasn't something I really wanted to do. Like I like that's design in the built environment. It's really different.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
I did, but I always had a love for, I had been interested in feng shui and I'd been interested in, my dorm room was always the dorm room that the kids, that my friends hung out in because of how I decorated it. So I always had that interest in that as creative expression.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So at that point, what is the next move then? What do
So
you do?
then I just leaned back into massage and I started doing massage. So we had bought an old historic American Foursquare and started remodeling it. And one of the first things we did was turned one of the main bedrooms downstairs that had a separate entrance. We turned that into my little massage space. So I had private clients there. And then I also was working at a massage center about a half a mile away that was downtown in this little cute little town that we lived in. So that was like an on-call sort of thing. Like she would call me and say, would you like this time at this client at this time? And I could say yes or no. So I was making my living as a massage therapist and then living in that town where I hadn't lived before. And I was like, oh, let's create community here for myself. And so that was when I put the invitation out to some friends and friends of friends and friends of friends of women solopreneurs. Let's do a mastermind together. And that, it wasn't, when I was still living in Oregon and doing those groups there, I was always doing them like just as a community service. I never thought I could charge for it. And at a certain point in time, somebody said, you could get paid as a professional facilitator to do these kinds of groups. And I was like, who would pay me to do this? And literally everyone in the room raised their hand.
Oh, wow.
So that was the beginning of doing professional facilitation for these kinds of groups. And so when I moved to New Jersey, I did a pilot group. And then after that, I started charging. And I did like one group per quarter
Okay.
for several years.
Nice.
And it started snowballing. And that was, again, that was like 2003 to 2008.
Okay.
So it was like before Zoom, before smartphones,
Sure. It's all in person.
before Facebook.
Yeah. Yeah. What I want to point out to you at this point for the audience is the opportunity to be able to pivot. And through your storyline, you've pivoted quite a few times because of your own.
Almost pathologically.
But also too, it's because of your intuitive instinct to go in particular directions using your skill sets, whether it's the graphic design, creative element, or if it's the healing modality. You're just pivoting back and forth.
The community piece too is like really
Yes.
woven in there.
Yeah. So what I'm getting at for the creative audience is that just because you're in one particular field of creativity, whether it's design, whether it's music, whether it's painting, whatever, if you just are able to take the opportunity to talk to someone like myself or you even, or any other mentors within the community, they can help you figure out a way to pivot using your skill sets and being able to move into something that brings more joy to your life and is not such a burden with
Mm-hmm.
what you're trying to do. So you're creating this new community again around these solopreneurs. And you said you're doing that up until 2008. At 2008, does that just stop or what happens in
No,
2008?
that was so all of these groups were in person because that was the mode of the day.
Sure.
But before I answer that question, I want to piggyback on what you just said about pivoting
Yeah.
because as creatives, we have so many skills that sometimes we don't even realize we have.
Yes.
And they're transferable skills to so many different industries.
Yes.
And we can get a foot in the door in those industries with something that seems unrelated, but yet is a perfect fit.
Exactly.
And it often takes someone outside of the water bottle to see the label on the water bottle, like a mentor or a coach or a guide who, or like how many, like Kent Shifford with the magic markers and the flip chart paper on the conference table, like someone who can help you say, there is a through line here. There is a way to take what you're naturally good at, what you love to do, what's your unique inborn genius
Yes.
that makes you feel like you lose track of time because it's so exquisitely in alignment with what you're here to do. To have somebody on the outside reflect back to you and go, you need a podcast for creatives and you need to interview Jelly Roll.
Oh, that's gold. That's gold for sure.
So we need mentors, we need seers. People can help us see the way seers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you for that. And thank you for stacking up what I had said. That needed to be amplified a bit more.
Yeah.
Uh,
To answer your question, so we got married on our 1 year anniversary of
okay.
meeting on Match.com. And about 6 months before our wedding, which by the way was on the river, on the Manasquan River, on a stern wheeler. This is, I think, something that is very potentially instructive for people in recovery.
Okay.
That when you're in recovery, you hit your stride at a certain point and you got your feet under you and you've got the life that you've now recreated from scratch without the yoke, the immediate yoke of the addiction or the mental illness. That's you've got some treatment, the treatment's working, your creativity is flowing, and you're feeling like I'm in a really good place. What invariably happens is you then hit your head on the ceiling of what's possible for your life. And you're in this unfamiliar zone where it's, I'm in a new era here, I'm in a new place, I'm in a new space, and I've never been here before. And my nervous system doesn't know how to manage this because life is going really well,
Mm.
right? It's like, how? And of course, at that point, the magic question is, how can I get willing to grow a nervous system that can enjoy massive amounts of positive energy for a long period of time without self sabotaging? But what we don't realize is that the self sabotage is actually fueled by a nervous system that's uncomfortable in this new space. So that's what happened with my fiance, my soon to be husband. He's working this recovery program, he's solid, life is going well. He's got a great job. He's able to do his passion, which is deep sea fishing in between jobs. He's got a relationship that is actually moving towards marriage with a woman that he adores. We had just bought a house, like that American Foursquare that we started tearing apart. He's a handyman, so he's having fun, like doing all the work, and hits his head on the ceiling. And develops some sort of digestive thing, some sort of really dramatic digestive thing, goes to a doctor. And in 2003, before all of the PR that massive opioid addiction
Oh,
and the destruction that causes, the doctor prescribes opioids for his pain. And down he went the rabbit hole and never came out. And he died from his addiction. It
my-
took a few years for his body to shut down. I got out before that happened.
yeah,
We spent about 2 years on in the dance of you need help, let me help you. You need help, let's get you help. You need help, are you willing to get help? Okay, I'll try a little bit of help. No, I don't really want it. At one point, he had 5 different doctors, 4 different pharmacies, Vicodin and Oxy, and he was doing this all the time because he doesn't have a steady supply of the pills. He
yeah.
starts buying the pills online from Russia.
Oh, wow.
And he's devolving before my eyes. He turns into a maniac, like a monster, like he's manic. He can't sleep. Sweat is flying off of him. He's up all night. He turns into a literal monster and he becomes verbally abusive and physically abusive.
Mm.
And I'm still like, let's get you help. This is an illness. Let's get you help. And 2 things happened. One is he tried this outpatient therapy,
Naloxone.
naloxone, yeah, to try and stair step him off of it. He figured out how to abuse that and ended up getting even sicker.
Yeah.
And the doc fired him. And I said, okay, now it's time for inpatient. If you're not, and he was like, I really don't want to get sober. I like being high all the time. I just want to figure out how to get drugs and a steady stream of them. I was like, thank you for telling me that. That's really good information. Because he had been resistant to it all along, but had never really named, I just don't want to get sober. That's why I'm not going to get sober. And I'm like, okay. And about the same time, I was doing some dog sitting. That was part of how I was bringing in a little bit of income, supplemental income, because I'm a dog lover and we didn't have a dog at the time. So I was dog sitting for a friend, and it was a little like Jack Russell type dog. And he was in one of his fits of rage and he kicked the dog in the flank. And
Oh, man.
the dog went flying across the hardwood floor. And that was the moment. It's interesting because even though he had been physically abusive to me and horribly emotionally abusive, it's like master level shit. And I actually started believing him because of all my childhood stuff.
Right.
And I remember my girlfriend at the time, who was my best girlfriend, I met her when I was working at Oregon State University bookstore print shop in my early 20s, and we're still best friends to this day. But I would call her in Oregon on the phone just sobbing over something that had happened or something that he did or something that he said. And she would patiently be with me. And at a certain point in time, she was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm scared for you, and I'm scared that you're not going to survive this. And I also, more importantly, really scared, not because of what Tony's doing or saying, but because you're really starting to believe him.
Yeah.
And at that time, I had a mentor who was a coach. He was actually from the world of and like landmark.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with that modality. It's very intense. Like I didn't resonate with it, but
I don't think I've ever
it's
heard of it.
it's like a personal growth and development modality, like world, like where you go and do trainings and you like sit in a conference room and listen to a speaker and you're like working through childhood traumas and you're like recommitting to what you want in your life. But it's very much like blood and guts on the carpet. It's really intense and it's very, like, most people would describe it as very passe and borderline abusive. I didn't
Yeah, I was
I
about to
didn't
say
know
that
that.
sounds a
I
little
didn't
bit.
I didn't really know that at the time, although I sussed it out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But there was this one mentor in my life who was from that world. He wasn't current to that world. And again, it was in a networking environment. It was like, we're together, we're business owners, and we're supporting each other and growing our businesses. And he was like the facilitator of the group, and he became a friend and a mentor of mine. And at a certain point, he said, "Are you open to feedback?" And I'm like, "Not yet."
Okay.
And then he'd see that I would come to the meetings and I would be like, "Gray, what's going on? Do you need any support? Is there anything I can do to help you? Are you open to feedback?" "Thank you, Steve, not yet." Like I still was like so in it and in the shame of it. And at a certain point, after the dog incident and the incident of him saying, "I don't want to get sober," I called Steve and I said, "I'm open to feedback." And he said, "I have one question for you. Where are you for you in all of this?" I had abandoned myself.
Right.
Like I'd lost the plot. And that was a pivotal moment too, because having him reflect that back to me, you have you in this. You're not alone in this. And it was like, oh. So I made a plan to leave. And I couldn't extricate myself consciously because of his control mechanisms. So I literally, in that group, that community that I was in of other solopreneurs, of which I was a member, not a facilitator, although I was in the leadership tier, and some women from the groups that I was facilitating as a facilitator, because you become friends. We're sisters, we're Kalyana Mitra, we're spiritual friends on the spiritual journey.
Yeah.
So I knew I could reach out to them and I would be safe. And so 7 of them on a Friday morning we planned this whole thing ahead of time, got a U-Haul truck, got the empty boxes. Tony left for work at 8 o'clock in the morning. I called them at 8:15. They were parked around the corner. They came in within an hour and a half. We had all of my stuff packed up that I'd brought into the relationship and our 2 dogs, because we had adopted a dog and then she had a puppy. And we were both Tony and I were head over heels in love with the dogs, and that was part of why I couldn't extricate myself very easily. And also his family, his big Italian family, was very loving and welcoming to me, and they were like the family I never had. And we were very involved with them, like socially, like we were friends.
Yeah.
So it was really hard. Like it wasn't just his control mechanisms, but there was also like, we have this beautiful house together. We have these beautiful dogs. He loves the dogs. I can't split the dogs up. His family, I can't leave his family. They love me so much. I love them so much. Blah, blah, blah. Plus, I
Yeah.
love the little town I lived in, and I love the world and the life that I'd created there. But that's what I did. And I even talked to the mailman. I said, "Can you promise me that there will be no way that he'll find out where I moved to?" And he was like, "No, it's illegal. There's no way he can find out the forwarding order."
Okay.
And I was like, "Okay." But apparently he was able to. Anyway, so I moved out into my own little condo about 45 minutes away. I took both dogs and he doubled down. Like I was like scared for my physical safety. I had friends staying with me every night. Like he's going to find out where I am.
Yeah.
And it took a year and a half to extricate myself, to complete the divorce. We tried mediation. We got fired. The mediator fired us. We tried couples therapy. Actually, that we tried couples therapy before I left. The therapist fired us because he would show up high.
Oh,
He was just so combative. And the mediator was like, "I cannot work in good faith with someone who isn't showing up in good faith. And so I have to fire you." And so it was like all this drama. And anyway, and during that time, I really doubled down on the whole community piece and the personal growth piece, because I was like, I am a smart cookie. I've done so much personal growth work. How on God's green earth in my mid 30s did I manifest a relationship that was so awful? It was like my soul had been run over the cheese grater.
yeah.
And it was all about these are things from your childhood that you haven't healed yet. You've attracted a husband who was just like your mother and father,
Yeah.
and let's make sure that you do the work that needs to be done so that this doesn't repeat itself. And so that 18 months became just about really getting my feet under me in a way that would enable me to make really different choices for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And community was the saving grace in that, and also my connection to nature, because during that time I was hiking like 5 to 8 miles a day, like without fail, on the river,
Yeah.
in the woods. And as far as the creativity piece, it was building that business, building the facilitation business of the success teams, and also doing more with the feng shui. So doing more feng shui consulting, which is a spiritual modality as well. It's a healing modality as well.
Yeah.
And it's also a manifestation modality. It's like, how do you want to create your life, and how can the environment support you? And how can we creatively work with the environment in such a way that you are supported for what you want to create in your life and how you want to heal?
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm.
exactly. That's rough. But you got through it, you got to a place of focus back on you, building that network up again. What is the next thing that comes across your purview as the next opportunity to move forward?
Yeah, so I really wanted to really sink into a modality that would carry me solidly forward,
Yeah.
like really do that big piece of healing.
Okay.
And so at the 18-month mark after moving out, I decided to sign up for an extended training in California with Gay and Katie Hendricks. And their whole thing is creative self expression as a tool for healing.
Okay.
And so I went out, I bought a plane ticket from New Jersey to California to do this. It was the first in the series of trainings was 12 days. Got a hotel room. My best girlfriend that I'd mentioned earlier, the one who has been my BFF since I was 23, she had done some very immersive trainings with them in the 90s. So I
Okay.
had some peripheral exposure to their modalities, and I saw how it took her from addiction to thriving, to take how it took her from being a corporate graphic artist working at a major engineering firm to full-time employment as a fine artist.
Okay.
And still now, even 30 years later, she's still employed full-time as a fine artist,
Wow.
supporting herself as a fine artist for decades.
Amazing.
And how it took her from being single and alone for most of her adult life in her late 30s to a really beautiful marriage that they just celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary in October. So I saw the power of that toolbox in my best friend's life, and I knew that at some point I would want to do what she did, become immersively involved in that learning community. And so that's what I finally was able to do. It took me She got involved with them in the mid 90s, and I started my training with them in 2008. So that's how long it took for it to manifest. But
Yeah.
so I did. And I absolutely loved it because it was all about if you put your creativity first, everything else falls into place. And if you use creativity as a healing modality, everything else falls into place. If you rely on your creative impulses, it will take you everywhere you need to go. And if you put creativity first and you live as a creative, and not just as a creative from an artistic standpoint, but a creative from in every moment I get to create what wants to happen.
Yes.
So I am not at the effect of my shortcomings and my wounds, not at the effect of my family of origin and the patterns that I was pickled in, the pickle juice that I was pickled in.
Yeah.
And I I have access to everything I need to design a life that is in alignment with my highest and best good and the natural gifts that I have for making a difference in the world, and also for using creativity as a primary driver for organizing my life.
Yeah.
So in 2008, I started basically a 6-year immersive journey of working and studying with the Hendrixes in that toolbox. And it's a very playful toolbox. It's a very lighthearted toolbox. It's a very, as I said, creativity centered toolbox. And yeah, so I got coaching certification from them, and I did in person trainings with them regularly for 6 years, like driving to California. So the other piece in that was that first training that I did in '08. I met my current husband there, and we've been married for 17 years.
Okay.
And so he was in that toolbox as well, using those same tools. And so that was a really good foundation for our relationship, because we knew we could always lean back and have a similar language for moving through when things would come up, when items or issues would come up. Because really, love is a poultice. Love is a drawing salve. It's going to pull out the pus, it's going to pull out what needs to be healed.
Yeah.
And relationship is like a crucible for transformation if you let it. When it can bring all of those childhood wounds up and bring them into the light of love, where you can get curious about what wants to happen here. Like, how can we write a new story here?
Yeah.
How can we approach this with light and love and play to build a different kind of way of being in the world? So, yeah, so that was a huge thing. And that led into me leading groups where creativity as self expression, creativity as a healing mode of self expression, that was a theme for me from 2008 until about 2014, when then we decided to move to France.
Okay.
He's 20 years older than me, and so he was of retirement age, and I've always wanted to live abroad. And I said, I've always thought at some point I would end up living abroad for a period of time, so that sounds about right. Sure, let's do that. So we spent a couple of years preparing to move over there, like doing all the long stay visa and all the paperwork, which was voluminous, and then selling our house, selling 95% of our belongings, and just moving over there and starting from scratch. Him being retired and me being a digital nomad, of continuing to do these creativity groups, but from there, and doing it via teleconference, again, pre-Zoom, pre being able to see each other on a screen, pre-Skype.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that has been a central theme for almost 20 years now.
Okay. What part of France did you go to?
So are you familiar with France, the map of France?
Not really, but I
So,
know
so
a
France is a
particular.
clock face. It's an octagon shape.
Yeah.
If it's a clock face, we were like about 6:30,
Okay.
and we were about 45 minutes inland from the Mediterranean Sea and about equidistant between the Spanish border and Provence. So it was
Okay.
a very rural area. It was a village of 600 people.
Okay.
Yeah, on the river.
Gotcha.
On the river.
Near water again.
Yep.
Was it was the community creative at all? Because I think of France, I think of Versailles, Paris,
Yeah.
the places where historically the arts were just flourishing. So that's where I was going with that location scenario. So it was a creative community too. So that also,
100%. Yeah, 100%. And in my involvement with the Hendrix community, I really reopened a chapter of my own artist self with painting and with textiles.
Okay.
You know, working with textiles artistically in the sense of art quilts and fabric dyeing and using natural dyes and watercolors.
Okay.
And so I brought that to my life in France and wanted to create an environment where I was spending more and more time doing that. And even leading creativity retreats where the people that I'd been working with in the States could come over and join me for creativity retreats. And we ended up living in this beautiful, probably one of the most beautiful little villages in the entire country. And when you live in a beautiful place like that, it's a tourist attraction.
Yeah.
So we didn't realize, I think, the extent to which living in a tourist destination has some major drawbacks to it. And like the influx of people and just how it changes the character of the place.
Yeah.
And then winter arrived, and we're living in this 400-year-old stone house that was like built up into this cliff that was above the river. The entire time that we had lived there through the spring and summer, we'd always had the windows and doors open. And when it started getting cold, we closed up the house and we discovered that the house was riddled with black mold.
Oh man.
I became sick, and so we swapped houses with our landlady who lived in Dublin or outside of Dublin. So we lived in Dublin then for a period of time. And then when we moved back to France in January, we were like, we have to find another house. And so we tried to find another house in that village, but they were all having issues because of being that close to the river. The water table was really high, and there was just a lot of water everywhere. And so we ended up moving to the foothills of the Pyrenees into a more modern home. It was still older, it was a hamlet of 40 homes, and the nearest village was about 300 people, and it was a half an hour away. So that was pretty rural.
Okay.
But again, I had a whole downstairs for an art studio, and the thing that actually got me was the Tramontane winds, these continental winds that come off of the Alps,
Uh,
that they can be sustained like 60-mile-an-hour winds for like weeks at a time.
mm,
Like it can drive you mad. And so I really started going mad. I'm like, I need to get out of the wind. Was not the solution. And my husband was like, okay, how about Italy? How about Spain? And so we started looking there, and he was like, I think you just really need to be in a very dry environment, because it was again like the Oregon with the wet and then the France with the wet. Like I
yeah.
needed, so he was like, let's just move back to Tucson. And I feel like the Sonoran Desert is a spiritual home for me. Like maybe I had a past life here or something.
Sure.
And so that was my longing the whole time we were in France, was to move back to the desert. And so we did after 2 years in France. And so I said, I'm never leaving the desert ever again. Yeah, I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Definitely. Only short stints towards water now.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Okay.
Pretty much.
You're in Arizona, and I'm guessing this is where you start building out your creative venture and working again from a creative standpoint, helping solopreneurs again. And what is the thought process of reviving that and moving that into where you're at now?
Yeah, so we moved back to Tucson in, I think it was 2014 or 2013. And we were renting a house on the east side, and I was still doing these groups. I was actually leading creativity retreats where people would come. I had these women that I'd been working with virtually, and I would have them come and we would do retreats there. And about a year into that, my husband said, I just miss France so much. I miss the village life. I miss being able to walk down to the main street, and I miss the smaller, tight knit aspect of it. And we went on a road trip to Salida, Colorado, where he has some friends of his lived, and it has a lot of those qualities. Again, it's on a river. And he was like, I really want to move to a place like this. And I was like, I cannot live landlocked. Even though technically Tucson is landlocked, we're only about a 4.5 hour drive from the Sea of Cortez. So you can,
You
that
can get
doesn't,
there
that's
half a day,
just, yeah.
half a day.
Yeah. So I'm like, Salida, Colorado, no, you cannot. I don't want to live at altitude. That doesn't feel right to from an Ayurvedic standpoint, it doesn't feel like the right fit for my constitution. But it started a yen in him of pushing for finding a way to recreate the experience of living in that village in France that he loved so much. And we found this little village about an hour and a half south of Tucson that was a population of 1,000. It's a little artist's colony kind of vibe.
Yeah.
And it's not in the Sonoran Desert, it's high desert grasslands, but again, on the river, actually a creek, but a pretty big creek. And so we started looking down there to move. And my original idea was to rent there to see if we would like it. But we ended up house hunting and worked with these realtors who we then became friends with. And they would keep calling us with these cute places. And we wanted to live on the outskirts of town, but maybe even find a piece of land and build a straw bale house on it. That was the original idea going down there, like a small straw bale house. And it turns out that you cannot buy land and get a mortgage. Like you need something to secure. So we were like, okay, scratch that idea. What if we just bought a house that was like a straw bale house that was already built? So we ended up buying this abandoned raw mud adobe miner's cabin that had been abandoned for 2 years. And it
Okay.
was like 1,000 square feet. And it was, do you know raw mud adobe? So the walls are like 11 inches thick, 12 inches thick. And it's like mud that's been dried in the sun. Like it
Yeah.
hasn't been baked. Yeah. So we did that. We bought that house and we spent a year renovating it, which I get to use my design skills, to use my creativity. I get to design the landscaping. And it had a little casita out back that was like 300 square feet. And I was like, the mortgage was a little bit of a stretch. So I'm like, we can turn this casita into a little vacation rental because this town was not only like an artist attractor, but it also was an attractor for birding. Like it was a world-class birders destination
Okay.
because of because of the migration paths of these some pretty rare birds that come from Mexico to the US. Again, it ended up being a tourist town. But we took the little casita and we turned it into a short-term vacation rental and put it on Airbnb and VRBO. And I got to remodel it and decorate it. It was cute as a button. I got to put my art on the walls. And it was incredibly successful. Like we were booked solid all the time. And we were like at the top end of what we could charge because it was so much nicer than the other places in the area.
Okay.
But then the monsoon season arrived. And I was like, it's too damp here for me. It's not the Sonoran Desert. So a year and a half after we finished these remodels, I was like, take me back to the desert. So we turned the main house into a vacation rental, which
Yeah.
took a few months to do that. And then we moved back to Tucson and we owned these 2 vacation rentals. So then I was a vacation rental owner manager. I created the branding for these 2 houses because each one had its own totally different vibe. I decorated them. I created the whole experience. So I'm just doing experience design as well.
Yeah.
All of just the welcome experience for the guests, like all of the manuals for here's what you should do in the area and And then I started working with other vacation rental owners in town to help them make their rentals better. And just having a lot of fun with all the branding and the decorating and the user experience creation,
Yeah.
design. And but it was a slog to drive an hour and a half every time there was a switchover. I tried hiring people to clone of myself to
Yeah.
do, because of the staging, like the staging of it, the exquisiteness of the staging, where you're fine tuning, like how are the sheets put on the bed? How are the pillows laid? How, like everything about it, like just up, like exquisite level of this is an art installation.
Yeah.
The experience here is an elevated, almost spiritual experience. And so I have a book, a guest book, where people can write their experience of it,
Okay.
full of people talking about how this was like a transcendent spiritual experience to stay in these homes.
Very cool.
So that's like a creative expression for me. But what I hated was actually running it. I just wanted to create it.
Yeah.
So at a certain point, I'm like, I hate the day-to-day management of it. I hate doing the bookings. I hate going back down there and changing the sheets and doing the laundry and blah, blah, blah. And so at a certain point, I was like, no. And then we started house hunting up here in Tucson and really couldn't find anything that we wanted. But my husband so we gave up. And my husband then randomly was walking our dog, one of our dogs. We only had one dog at the time, nearby the house we were renting, and found this house that we were living in it wasn't even on the market yet. They had just put the sign out and said coming soon. And he's, what if we buy this place? And I was like, we'd have to sell the houses in Patagonia, which would be fine with me. So we
Mm.
sold the houses turnkey. We sold them as businesses with all the branding, the website, with all of the furnishings, with everything, the
Nice.
cleaning supplies.
Nice.
Here's the workflow, here's the onboarding, here's the offboarding, here's everything, here's the scripts. It was like a full thing that I just said, good riddance. Good.
Right.
But it did open up to, when we were down there, so the internet connection is really bad there, and the remodeling process and setting up the businesses and running them was so all consuming that I really wasn't doing anything with the groups, and I wasn't doing anything with my own like artist life. I do consider everything I did was like creative expression, but
Sure.
I wasn't like making art for myself, and I wasn't running groups. But I had all these vacation rental owners saying, can you do branding for me? Can you do a website for me? Can you do a logo for me? And so that kind of morphed into, oh, I'm a website designer now. I'm a brand designer. And then my sweet spot, of course, is working with people like me who are in the healing arts, who are into creative expression, who are into like personal growth and development. And so it very easily morphed into, now I'm not working with vacation rental owners, but I'm working with my tribe, like my people.
Yes.
So that's where I've been for the last 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, is just doing that. And now how I met you is going back to my roots of morphing those two, where it's about building community
Right.
and using that as a springboard for personal growth and development, and also getting your light into the world. How can we get your light into the world? Whether it's me helping you with website design and brand design and copywriting and spiritual midwifery there, like
Yeah.
feeling into your essence, feeling into what is your unique genius
Yeah.
that makes you different than all of the other dime a dozen coaches and body workers and movement educators. And also this piece of how can we, as Kalyana Mitra, spiritual friends on the spiritual journey, how can we link elbows, link arms to support one another in shining our light so that we can make the world a better place?
Yeah, exactly. With that in mind, there's one element that I want to pull out and see where this came to the forefront of your consciousness, and that is the intuitive element. What point across your life and all these different trials and hardships that you've experienced, as well as joyful times and truly fulfilling times, at what point did you start to realize that your intuition was coming into play? And as you would go on these paths of personal development, would you see that start to expand? What point did it start? And then where did you start to see it expand?
I think it was always there because as a highly sensitive child
Yeah,
who's very tuned into very subtle things,
yeah,
like subtle mood shifts
yeah,
as a survival mechanism, and just highly sensitive in terms of knowing what people need in any given moment, like knowing how to meet them. So I think I've been really intuitive from the get go, and then like listening to different things more intentionally, like in my early 20s, like studying energy work and
yeah,
studying Reiki and studying polarity therapy and lots of different energy work modalities were really fascinating to me. Working with intuitives as a client, I'm the client and I'm working with an intuitive
yeah,
or intuitives, and really devoting myself to developing my intuition. That's why I think it was so hard with my second marriage because I really did fancy myself quite an intuitive person. So if that's so, then how did I get myself into this pickle? And it was because I was ignoring all the red flags.
yeah,
And a part of it too with Tony was if everyone in my family is either an addict or married to an addict, in that case, mostly alcoholism, and if it's my lot in life to be either an addict or married to an addict, at least I'll marry an addict who has 13 years of solid sobriety and devotion to his sobriety and like street cred and mileage with his sobriety. So I thought, this is the solution.
yeah. Right, right.
My current husband, who I've been married to for 17 years, is not an addict.
Fantastic.
Like that movie, It Ends With Us. It ends. I don't have kids. I don't have any plans to have kids, obviously, at this age, but it ends with me.
Nice, nice.
But the intuition piece, yeah, it's like letting myself know what I know, and not overriding it with a like when Ken first, my current husband's name is Ken, when he first floated the idea of moving abroad, we had only been together a few months at that time. And my immediate response, my intuitive response was, I really love the Sonoran Desert and I love our life here. Why would I want to move? So if I had stuck with that initial intuition, but at the
Right.
same time, like having lived abroad, having had that experience and having lived in those gorgeous places and the
Yeah.
people we met that we're still friends with, I don't think if I had it to do over again, I would change anything.
Okay. Okay.
So, intuition, yeah. I don't know if that answers your question. How did I
When did you see it expand?
definitely working with the Hendrixes, starting to work with the Hendrixes in 2008?
Okay.
It's definitely a quantum leap for me because part of their toolbox that they teach and it's not just about having been taught a particular tool, but the practice
Yeah.
of employing that tool in day-to-day life. A big piece of it for them is tuning into the wisdom of our bodies.
Right.
Like our bodies are already giving us every answer we need,
Yes.
and using that information, like treating your body as an ally treating your whole body yes and your whole body no, as using that to navigate decisions, small decisions and big decisions. Like,
Right.
what do I eat for breakfast? Or do I take this job? Or do I take this client on? Or do I take this workshop or whatever? Like, feeling, not just making the decision from here up.
Right.
Once you access all of that information, and also the information like that exists more in your auric field outside of you, it's a game changing sort of practice, like adopting that practice. And it is a practice because it's not something that ever really gets mastered. Like, you're always in the process of learning, learning, and learning. And then and being in community again, where that Hendrix community is a learning community. It's a community of practice, like hyphen, community hyphen of hyphen practice. We are about the business of tapping into what is innately our unique genius, expressing that in the world creatively, and using creative self expression as a tool for getting to know ourselves better, but also for tapping into more of the really aligned what wants to happen next. Like, what wants to happen now? That's a point of power in the present moment. I don't have to create based on anything that's come before. I can just create from what wants to come through me now, using my intuition, using my whole body wisdom to make that decision point, that pivot point.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I think that's a perfect place to end today. And I always want to remind the listeners at this point in the conversation to listen to your heart and be kind to your mind.
Ooh, beautiful. I love that.